And there we go. Just like that. We are live. Welcome everybody. Hash Church 3.0 episode 24 on June 6th of 2021. I'm just going to quickly go in and mute the link that's live, copy it and paste it into the other YouTube room so everyone can come and play. And welcome, dude. Welcome to Dustin Powers in the house from Future 4200 website. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. The rest of the crew is late to the party, so it's just you and I, man. Really nice to meet you finally here on Hash Church, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about your website and kind of talking about how you started it and how it all kind of came to be, and just really much respect for what you've done. You know, it seemed like a lot of the websites, I don't want to say fell off, but kind of fell off when cannabis became more integrated into Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and still they like to play and shut down accounts. But you really pushed through with the chemistry and kind of brought this group of people that were still willing to stay together. I just didn't see it on IC Mag. I just didn't see it on some of the other websites that just, some of the hardcore stayed, but to me, the websites really crumbled compared to what they once were.
Yeah, absolutely. And, none of them had a focus on the cannabis processing. And that was, those two things between current social media platforms being a terrible repository for information, unsearchable. You got all this information in the comments that you'll never find again, which that pushed me right back into the forum mindset. And I started, investigating all the different cannabis forums. And I realized there's a huge gap. There's no cannabis processing forum, IC Mag, because I came up under Grey Wolf. So I knew all about IC Mag, but it's got one subcategory for processing, and that's it. There's no, there's no organization there. There's no detailed, like what we have on Future 4200 right now. So I just saw a giant hole and realized it was something that we needed to do.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that because I remember on Overgrow back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I got on there. It was Breeder Steve that was like, come on to Overgrow. I'm in the Shark Tank. And I was kind of like, the Shark Tank? What's the Shark Tank? Little did I know that's where all the trolls hung out. And that was like where people got into it. But I ended up into the main room. And I can't even remember what the main room was. Welcome, Dr. Mark. Just talking about Overgrow right now. And thank you for introducing Dustin and bringing him onto the show today. I really appreciate that. But yeah, Overgrow just had like a photo gallery, and that's where Bog and Gypsy and myself and High Grade and some other kind of key early people were just posting these. What we did back then was we went and bought $2,000 and $3,000 digital cameras. They were Sony CyberShots. They were like 2.2 megapixels. This was like 1999. And it was the beginning of digital photography. It was the beginning of being able to actually take a pretty decent shot. It's funny to think that 2.2 megapixels was a big thing. I definitely paid over $2,000 for that camera just in order to show hash porn. And so that's how I started my company on Overgrow, and I would post all these pictures. And this one forum on Overgrow, this one folder that we all were posting in was where everyone was. And so eventually Shebang, who started the website, contacted me and say, hey, listen, I want to get you a hash room. And it was certainly, it's just like you were saying, like unsearchable, one simple room, not really focusing on processing. But keep in mind, this was really the beginning days to where we would get to with your website eventually. And it was just like, it was kind of a love-hate relationship I had with it, because I went from going into this one room that had like 30,000 people in it into a room that nobody knew existed. And it was up to me to build up that room and bring other hash makers. It took years. But then at the same time, all that great information, how are you going to search it? How are you going to like organize the information and the data? I mean, honestly, it's very much like Hash Church for that matter, because Hash Church is unsearchable. There's gems on Hash Church. And if ever there's people that, maybe have no lives and just want to sit around and watch 10,000 hours of Hash Church, boy, is there a value in picking out the nuggets that have been said on this show. Maybe we'll learn a little bit about that today from some of the things you share about, Future 4200, how it kind of came to be, and, where it's at today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Mark. Thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for all your contributions on the forum and everything you've done for cannabis. So appreciate you.
Yeah, I'm not on there enough because I realized the other day as I was trying to scroll through and catch up that I'm so behind and it moves a million miles an hour. And it's so cool. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of tongue in cheek, kind of back and forth. But I mean, I think when you wade through, there's quite a bit of useful information. And I think, again, you fill an unmet need that's out there, which is, and I think Hash Church is different though, Mark. It's kind of like, I think of Hash Church is kind of like, again, reporting back in between weeks of future 4200, which is constantly happening. It's
Yes.
kind of like, to me, it's like 4200 is part of the natural continuum, that there's this dialogue, and the dialogue is constantly happening. And it was just like so fortunate that, again, that I actually found a couple conversations there, because I think in my own education, in my own self-exploration, in trying to find out what are the best methods and processes, if you ever close your mind to learning, you're missing the ticket.
Yeah,
So just because I have all those plaques on the wall there, that doesn't mean that I know everything. And I go there all the time and learn new stuff. And you think that, oh my God, what is this guy doing on his phone? It's mostly 4200.
learning.
Just catching up. Just catching up. I love.
Dude, I got my plaques.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we got a whole lot of bases to cover here. I completely agree with you. We have there's this issue with the internet, right, where people can act like idiots with very little repercussion. And I thought we had this figured out at the beginning, but as a forum moderator, administrator, it's impossible. It's impossible to make everybody happy. So we've taken as hands-off an approach as possible, and it has its pros and it has its cons, right? Like, I spend a lot of time on other technical forums, like whether it be carpentry or working on my tractors or in permaculture, yada yada. And a lot of them are a lot more civil than our forum, but our forum gets a lot more done a lot quicker. So there's this give and take. And you're right, this form of communication that we're in right now on Hash Church, it definitely works well as a summary. Also, we're looking at each other face to face, so we're much more polite. Nobody's calling each other names. Nobody's being a troll, and that's a huge important thing. And there, there's all these different sides to the internet, and I don't think you can have one platform that does it all. It's just not. It doesn't work that way. So you're right. Being able to summarize after a week of nonsense with little gems in there, that's golden. So, and to talk about the formation a little bit, it came out of necessity. Like I said, I wasn't able to search Instagram, and that came up because I was working a consult job, and the customer asked me a question that I didn't quite know, but I knew that I had read like a week or two previous on Instagram. I said, give me a sec. Let me see if I can find that little gem. 10, 15 minutes later, I gave up. I was like, it's impossible. You can't search this at all. And I had the thought in my head, wow, I wish there was a cannabis processing forum. Spent a couple of weeks looking. Like I said, there wasn't anything, and I didn't have the technical skills to start a forum. So I just kind of let the idea slide. I said, well, that would be great someday if somebody did that. About 2 weeks later, I was working a booth with Cascade Botanicals. Sidco Cat invited me. She's one of the original skunk farmers. I had worked with her and JD and Joe Oakes at Farm Gold. Joe actually brought me on board there. I was working that booth with Cascade. Catherine was there, and her son Sidco was there. And at the end of the day, he said, hey, man, you should start a forum for cannabis processing. And we hadn't talked or anything. I said, wow, man, if that wasn't meant to be, I explained this whole story to him, and I said, look, I don't have the technical skills, but I have a bunch of ideas on how, if you do the technical side, we can get this populated immediately. And you know how you said it took you a couple years to get your new room rolling? I leveraged the power of Instagram to jumpstart the forum because we hit the ground running. We did a couple giveaways. I was in the process of downloading every single piece of scientific literature I could find on cannabis using LibGen, Sci-Hub. And then I would format the titles, and then I'd categorize it. And I called it the data dump. And I used the data dump as incentive for people to come to the forum, I put up a post. I said, look, if you repost this, if you tag a couple of your friends, I'll give you the link to the data dump with all of this information. And it just hyperlinked people over to the forum. And that's where we initially stored it. So right off the bat, we had multiple thousand members just hit the ground running. And at the same time, I shared 2 different large scale techniques that I had developed. One of them was bucket tech. It was, if you got a shed and a bunch of mid to low quality cannabis, can you extract the cannabinoids for cheap and safe in your backyard and at scale? And yeah, you definitely can with ethanol and buckets and a washing machine. And so we had the full write-up SOP on that. And then at the same time, I had also developed a technique for remediation of myclobutanol from distillate. And the timing was such that California changed its laws, and all of a sudden all of the distillate had to be pesticide free. It was an overnight decision. So you had all these companies with millions of dollars of inventory laying around. I convinced one of them to let me come in. They paid for all the testing. We figured it out. And my deal with them was reciprocity on the IP. I said, look, you can take the IP, do whatever you want. I'm going to take the IP and do whatever we want. We can't hold each other back. We can't tell each other what to do. That's the deal. And they were stoked. I gave them like 3 days head start. So they were able to remediate all their stuff and sell it into a market that was void of distillate. And on my end, I wrote it all up into an SOP, and it was the third, prize for coming to Future 4200 this is where the pesticide remediation SOP will be hosted for free forever, so that we can make more clean, quality products throughout, because that kind of my underlying goal is.
What year was that, Dustin? Like what I'm just trying to place that on the calendar. When was that?
I should write these things down, but 2017, 2018, I think 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe 17, 18, somewhere around there.
Okay, so it was right when that California reg kicked in, right?
Yes, whenever that is. Okay. Yes, so there's a hard set date in the sand right there. Whenever they changed that, but I'm sure you could look that up.
Right. So immediately you just had this huge audience because there was this need. Oh my God, I got to remediate my distillate. How do I do that? I need an SOP. Bam, they go to Google, they find your thing, and they're hooked. They know that here's a resource when I have issues around whatever that I can kind of constantly go back to.
Yep.
So that's a great story, man.
How's it going, Mike?
What's up, Dustin?
Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. You too.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good. Yeah, no, as Dustin kind of mentioned, there was a couple of states that were coming online with the requirements to test pesticides. And, back in many of the states where medical, they would test for the cannabinoids, and some analytical labs would offer to test for the terpenoids, but very little regulatory requirements were required by the medical states. So there was a kind of unregulated industry, right? And
the timing was such that some of these labs were now getting the mass spectrometers that had the sensitivity and the library to say, oh my God, look what's in here. There's a whole bunch of crap in here, and we could do mass spec matches in our library that we unequivocally know, here's this compound, here's this compound, and here's this compound. So it was kind of like, both things, the regulation, but also the sophistication of the analytical instrumentation in the testing labs allowed these things to be found and quantified. And so again, going back to the usefulness of 4200 as a forum, it's like, well, if you need to understand about those techniques, sensitivity of those techniques, what kind of techniques are out there. I mean, if you know nothing about the field, you can do a deep dive on that forum and get all kinds of information, right, Dustin?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's like people, how do I get into the cannabis processing industry? Man, go spend a week on your professional training on the forum. Go read through as much of that as you can get through, and you have a huge jump start to, if you don't know anything, to I got a job making hash in 2 weeks. What do I do? That's a great free resource for you.
Man, isn't that a funny, accurate statement? I got a job making hash next week and I don't know what to do. It's like, well, why the
That's
fuck
where we're
did
at
you
now, yeah.
apply for the job if you don't know what you're, and it's crazy to think.
Yeah, but you know, I didn't know how to make pizza when I got my first pizza making job, right? Like a lot of people don't know what they're doing when they get their job. That's kind of life, right? So, and in a normal world, you'd be able to go and sweep the floor for $1 an hour and learn by experience, or as an apprentice or whatever. But in the real world, when
That's
a
what
hash
we do.
maker, yeah, and that's how it should be. That's
Yeah,
you know, if
we
you don't have
train
any
the techs.
skills,
Look, the industry has been plucked clean. I mean, let's be real. The good ones have already been paid for. They're taken away. So people are going to fake the funk. People are going to lie what they have to do, but they do this in everyday jobs all the time. You know, early on, I didn't know what I was doing and I had to figure out things. There was no rule books on how to, you know, run a dispensary or any of that. So, you know, we just grabbed it by the seat of the pants. So, you know, now there's rules, as we say. Before, we were building a plane while flying it. Now you've got runways, you've got engines, you can take off, you can do all these different things. So plan it before you start it and try to do as best as you can. But, you know, a lot of these businesses and jobs are new. So, you know, getting in there and fitting in and trying to figure it out is real world. So, you know, Dustin's not wrong.
No, I definitely agree. At the same time, I got to say, and shout out to all my techs that we've trained over the last year at Embark. These guys came in with very little knowledge, most of them, and they have learned to have, you know, if you teach people the right way and the correct SOPs and the right pathways to the results that you're looking for, it's incredible how fast people can really kind of, you know, and I'm talking mostly solventless right now, but I'm sure it will be the same when Mike starts training people on his side of the lab. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. Shout out to the new hash makers that are coming on. I definitely remember the days where I knew nothing. Thank God I got lucky and got to stand on the shoulders of some pretty amazing giants.
Well, people prefer people that have little to no experience, because those who have experience will want to do things their own way. Whereas those that have SOPs, they will follow them to a T, which is what you need and have to do. So, you know, we're all about breaking the rules, but know the rules before you break the rules is all I'm saying.
You got to strike a certain balance. You know, you have to be able to do something unique and something expressive that you could put your own individual creativity into. But you're absolutely right. You're probably going to have to follow a set of SOPs that you may not think is the best way of doing things, but regulation and the rest of your company requires you to do it. And it becomes really terrible when you have belligerent employees that think that they know how to do it and end up either wasting a whole bunch of product or contaminating a whole bunch of stuff, and then you have to go see. That's why you don't do that.
That's the worst. Hey, I
We have
want to
no problem
welcome
with
everyone in
mistakes.
the room. Welcome to Anne Fontaine, who I just spoke over. Apologies for that. Welcome to Johnny fucking B with the Save the Terps hat on. Crazy bastard that he is. Love him, love him. Welcome to Mike West. Welcome to Mr. Vessel Life. Colin Palmer's in the house. And dude, you came in with such a serious face, Colin. It's what made me laugh. I was like, I looked around.
Church.
You were like,
I was looking at something on my screen really intently. I was like, what is that? And that's awesome. that's my mind's churning look.
Totally. I saw it. I caught it.
Good to see you guys. How's everyone doing? Nice to see we got Future 4200 Dustin. What's going on, brother? Nice to meet you in the internet fashion. Mark, everyone, Johnny B, of course. Thanks for having me, Marcus. And, I'm en route to California this week, so if anyone is around, I will be there.
So am I.
Nice. I'll be LA first and then San Francisco second. So I'll be there until Friday.
I'm going to San Francisco first and LA second.
Which day are we which day are we crossing?
Wednesday we're driving down.
So LA, let me ask you guys a question because I've never been there, but I did watch the movie The Money Tree. I don't know if any of you have ever seen The Money Tree, but it's an incredible movie. And Buddy says, what's LA like? And he says, oh, LA is like a big submarine sandwich when you're really, really hungry. And you start eating it, and you're just starving. But then you realize there's like a big piece of shit in the middle of the sandwich. But you're so hungry, you just eat around it. Is that what LA is like?
Yeah, pretty much. I've lived in LA. You know, I've also lived in the good spots with Todd back when he was in Bel Air and stuff like that. So I'm kind of biased in having the nice places to stay. But I've been to there's lots of shitty places around. But you know, it's like pockets. You know, it's like anywhere else.
Very affluent cool pockets, areas surrounded by the barrio. With the
it's a megalopolis
on one side and the ocean on the other. You know,
there's more shit than sandwich for sure.
Oh shit,
for sure.
I kind of take it like you take all the neighborhoods in New York City, like East New York, like the far-reaching corners of the Bronx, and you just put them in the middle of the city. That's kind of the deal with LA, and you can't cross the city without going through those neighborhoods. So it'll never ever really change without that changing as well.
So then like the nicer areas in which Etienne was talking about, I guess there's more bread there, because if you have more bread in a shit sandwich, you eat less shit. Is that how it works?
Yeah. Lots of condiments, lots of mustard.
In the Bronx, so don't get me wrong there.
Yeah, but you're talking about Universal City, Hollywood, Beverly Hills. You're talking about some of the most affluent areas of the United States.
Where they have more bread.
Yeah, that's right.
They might even have a little cheese over there.
You got a little dough.
Spread that shit a little thin.
So it's pretty much shit. Good to avoid. San Francisco is also shit. There's maps that'll tell you how much shit and where it is to avoid it, like literally. So it's gotten weird down there.
But there's great places too. Don't get me wrong. It's just, you know, it's a megalopolis. So you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, you know, there's more bad and ugly than there are good.
Well, I'm just going to hang out up here in BC for a little while longer, I guess, and enjoy my interactions through the internet until, well, it sounds like people are starting to make trips. It sounds like stuff is, maybe we'll be able to hug people here soon enough. Like,
I think June 21st, they said was some date that they're going to make some proclamation on whether or not Americans can go back to Canada, right? Is that right? June 21st? Has anyone else heard that?
It's like in New York, the Juneteenth, where you get the sun lines perfectly up with the avenues, so you can get this incredible shot all the way down or view.
That's what's up.
Berkeley Hinge.
So they'll let me come back to Canada as long as I identify as vaccinated, right?
I think the way it goes is
I don't think we're doing that, are we?
You can't come back.
Identify, yeah.
Canada currently requires a 2-week quarantine. That's $5,000 in a hotel, but I believe that they're discussing it, and if both sides of the border are starting to show herd immunity, they'll start looking at opening up the border. The big issue is obviously both countries want to minimize the risk of variant transmission. So we don't.
Can we only quarantine in like $300 a night hotels? Is that what they're saying? That's baller.
I think it's the 14-day minimum. They test you on the first day and test you on the 10th day. But I believe if there's a certain target, if 70% of the population has their first shot, then they're going to probably allow vaccinated people to cross the border. But it's, as with anything, there's many great plagues throughout history were spread due to travel. But as long as you're traveling in a safe and smart fashion and not traveling when you're sick, there's ways to minimize that risk.
And what, I just got to show them my little piece of paper?
Hopefully.
Probably, yeah. Probably. We'll see. Let's hope not. Let's hope not. Although that little piece of paper looks pretty easy to create. Why don't you just put that on the Xerox machine and put Dustin's name on that?
I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I'm
full disclosure. That's a felony in the United States.
I'm gonna spend a weekend with Marcus, man. world will never be the same. And we're just going to show up on Hash Church one day, and it'll just be me and Marcus sitting next to each other, right?
And Mike,
I might join you.
And Mike, yeah, too. Yeah, without any
let me know.
masks.
Hey, I got my piece of paper. We're good to go.
Let's go. I'm ready.
Nice. You guys got the
I got
papers. They
mine,
got to
Sam.
open up the borders soon. They gotta.
Right.
Well, they're supposed to open up California on June 15th, but OSHA has made us aware that even though the state is opening up, there will be no new information for employees until July 31st. So it's still masks on in the real world for working it and doing it, unfortunately. So
Washington opened back up. We open back up. I think the 30th is the day they're going to get rid of all COVID restrictions on the 30th of this month. Although they said they're going to maintain the state of emergency, which gives the governor a whole bunch of like extra constitutional powers, which is strange. But currently they lifted the mask mandate, and there's no more restrictions. Now, some of the denser populated, like Seattle, people are still wearing masks, and most of the businesses are requiring masks. Where I live out in rural Washington on the coast, no masks, no restrictions. Life is back to normal. Not that it ever really left normal, but now it's actually like fully normal.
The only thing I really want people to do here is hash. So no masks, but hash. You got to do hash, man. You can't be coming on to Hash Church and not doing hash. So come on.
There we go.
We got our pipes. Here's a pipe. Actually, I think I might hit this little crazy Ewok one. This is fun right here.
That is nice little slurper.
Yeah, good little slurper. You know, I've got my OG slurper from JP, and you can really see the difference. In the length. This one really is much more like that. What do you call it there, Mike? The rising film evaporator style.
Yeah, that's my first thought, that the path there is getting long. You get good separation.
Yeah, that's what they based it on for sure. That seems to be where they're going with it. You know, let's create a longer, thinner tube, not a wider, shorter.
They need a vacuum jacket, that little part right there. That'd be sweet.
Get it all jacketed up. Yeah, so you get your little marbles in there. There's 3 of them in there. And hit a little 6-star. Looks
Dustin,
like Johnny B's torching up.
I was going to ask Dustin just about some of the controversy we hear about Delta 8. What's going on that whole thread?
Okay.
4200, man. It's pretty big and pretty controversial topic. And I just want to throw that out there for discussion.
Okay. Yep, I knew this one was coming. I've been thinking about it a lot and trying to follow a lot. You know, like I think a lot of people assume that I'm like fully aware of everything that goes on in the forum. Impossible. No person. That's impossible. Like I have a life. Like Okay, so Delta 8. We'll just start. Bunch of people are making.
Yeah, let's start with kind of how why people started making it, right?
Okay, we're gonna start at the beginning. Back in the day, we were running the short path, making distillate. It was coming out orange, yellow. Most of our short paths were like cheap Chinese glass you got on Amazon because nobody was making it. We were just piecing together chemistry sets. People were throwing all sorts of crazy ideas out there. One of them, which this is how Photon Noir broke into the scene. He said, look, if you take, he sold this as an SOP, but it's fully open now. If you take an activated bleaching clay, which is just like clay that's been acid washed, or certain types of silica, like filter sands, all of these various medias, you can throw them into the boiling flask and the distillate that comes out will be basically water clear. Not wrong. Is great. Fantastic. And this is before, we talked earlier about testing and the ubiquity of testing and the how advanced these labs were. This is way before any of that. This is when the labs were testing cannabinoid content of flowers. Maybe they'll test cannabinoid content of your extracts. In Washington, it was a little better than other states. But so you throw these things in there, it makes water clear. But one thing we didn't know, because without the testing and when you're just making a bunch of carts to send off wherever, you're not testing every single bit. What was happening is you're greatly reducing your Delta 9 content, and you were also greatly increasing bunch of other random peaks all over. You're making like a dirty mess of distillate. One of those peaks we've now realized is Delta 8, and this is something that's been known for a long time, but the labs just finally caught up to what these scientists had back in the 60s and 70s. So we were making Delta 8 on accident, making really nice looking carts. moved forward quite a few years. We've refined the technique through analytics back end. We got really high quality D8, but it's very difficult to get that last little Delta 9 out. And there's a bunch of really shady ways you can make Delta 8, and doing it that way leaves the possibility of having all sorts of nasties left in your distillate, anywhere from like the reagent that you used or the catalyst that you use is something dangerous or radioactive or super toxic, like, and you might have left that in there, or it could have also caused all sorts of weird side reactions. Like we converted the Delta 9 into God knows what, one of those cannabinoids that in the literature says it killed the rats immediately. Like who knows? There's all these weird shit that could happen, but that didn't stop anybody. And for years they did that and sold it. And as far as we know, nobody like died. There's no chronic outbreak of everybody died from this batch of distillate. Now that doesn't mean that it's safe. Who knows if those people are going to get cancer and die in 30 years or not. You know, we don't know that about smoking vape pens either. Like those might give you cancer and kill you in 30 years too. Point is, when a member, Ion Trap, said everything out there is got dangerous side compounds, cyclohexanes, all these different toxic things. My testing has showed this, and this, and except for this one lab, I found this one random pen that's safe and it's clean, and all of the ones I tested, and yada yada. And everybody's like, "Wow, this is crazy." A bunch of people jumped on it. A bunch of people were like, "Well, maybe that's a little weird." Roll back a couple of years, a lab that got involved with us, KCA. They have been active on the forum for a long time. They're out in Kentucky. They've been always upfront about everything they're doing. They sponsor competitions within us. They talk, they improve their procedures based on what we say. They hopped in and said, "Oh, that's interesting. We want to test a bunch of different samples. We want to see if that's the case." And then at that same time, when they crowdsource this big funding or this big testing campaign, and they run through it and they get all these random samples from all over the place and they start testing them. It comes out that Ion Trap is a member of that company or works for that company. That was the one clean one. And a bunch of other people start asking questions, and it turns into this 1,000-long comment thread of he said, she said, what's going on here? Who's a scammer? KCA comes back and finds none of any of that in multiple different, all of them. None of them had those impurities in it, and they run another round and same thing. So it turns out that people aren't making super dangerous Delta 8. Delta 8, while still most of it is hot with Delta 9 because it's a very difficult process to get that last little Delta 9 out. We have yet to find a random sample that has any of these super toxic compounds. Now you can take like a palladium conversion. No, that's CBN. A PTSA, a fairly toxic acid. If you left a bunch of that in there, it would be no bueno and be pretty easy to identify, but people are not doing that. So, we are seeing pretty decent, like, WOOC grade chemistry here on this Delta 8 thing. It's unfortunate what's happening on the regulatory side because of the implication that it could be unsafe, or whatever it is that our federal government has up its ass about cannabinoids is coming through on D8. And not only does that ruin the potential for D8 for its truly medicinal value, which is that it's strongly antiemetic. It's almost absolutely antiemetic. That's super important for children that are getting chemotherapy, right? The way that people die when they're getting chemo a lot of time is that they're not able to feed themselves. They're not able to hold down nutrients. And with Delta 8, you can completely eliminate that problem. And then the second problem with the regulation that's coming about from this fear campaign, basically, is that it starts to affect all the other cannabinoids that have medicinal benefits. We're looking at now, are we going to still be able to make CBN because of the interim D8 that perhaps gets made, or are conversions going to be, they're going to synthetic chemistry of cannabis and you can't do it anymore. It's like, so this D8 thing is a wild ride for sure.
It just killed a bill alone in Texas because they added Delta 8 to the hemp bill. And I've got friends in Texas who have been working on it, and that sank that one quicker than anything. It was the fastest torpedo. So the individual cannabinoid firing and misfiring is going to be a problem. It's going to be a cannabinoid whack-a-mole situation until legalization and compounds. Don't you think, Dr. Skeldon?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I don't have a problem with the molecule itself. The molecule is cannabinoid, so it's safe, meaning that humans can take a lot of it. It's not going to shut down your breathing. You can't OD by taking Delta 8, but I guess, you know, whether those results are real or not, what it does call for is production under some type of regulated environment, because it's no longer an extract. It's no longer, well, it's kind of like hash or, I mean, no, it's not like extracted anymore. It's basically the product of a chemical reaction. And a product of a chemical reaction, yeah, as Dustin points out, could, depending on how you run that chemical reaction, could have a lot of different products there. Marcus, can you let me share my screen so we can go through some literature I pulled up here so we can talk about this?
Absolutely.
Can I share my screen? So I hit the share screen thing?
I think that's about it. That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's see. Let's do screen.
And then select which on your page. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Meshulam literature. You know, this is great, Dustin, because this is exactly what I had as a PhD chemist. I mean, I had not learned cannabinoid chemistry academically or in my graduate work or my postdoc work. I had to go and totally self-immerse myself into this literature. And here we find a paper from Rafi from, oh, this is beautiful. I think the title of this paper is Hashish. He's got like, I think he's got like there's a series of like 4 of these where just the chemistry of hashish. And look, this is from 1966. I'll bet you half of our viewing audience wasn't even born yet, right? So look at what he describes here. So he describes here, this is like the first time that I'm seeing this in the literature, where he shows the conversion of CBD right here over into, well, here's Delta 8, and he's got an arrow going to Delta 8, but he also has an arrow going to Delta 9. And so I think he recognized right away is that you can use acid catalyzed cyclization chemistry to cyclize. And here's even something cooler for me. Look what he did after he cyclized it. He hydrogenated it and made hexahydrocannabinol. This, I think, is one of the first reports of hexahydrocannabinol here. And you can see it gives both a mixture of both up and down. So this is from 1966. This is from earlier in the year. Later that year, when his article published in the Journal of the American Chemical Society, he entitled it Concerning the Isomerization of Delta 1 to Delta 1,6. That's the old nomenclature. That would be Delta 9 to Delta 8 these days by our nomenclature. And what you see here is that, yes, he does have a procedure that uses things like sulfonic acids to basically isomerize this, which is Delta 9, into Delta 8, because Delta 8 is more thermodynamically favored. But it's very interesting here because what you also see is you can see isomerization of other cannabinoids. In this case, this here is CBC, and CBC can isomerize over into this very peculiar, what's called iso-THC. And so where iso-THC rears its ugly head, this is a paper from much later. So this is from, this is called The Chemical Aspects of CBD. I know this paper by heart by Hanush and Meshulam. And in this paper, he describes what happens when you take CBD and you treat it with acid. Yes, you can and mostly make Delta 8 THC, but under certain acidic conditions, you can make other compounds, including this isomer of THC, which is called iso-THC. And in fact, this group of Italians last year published this wonderful paper on the conversion of cannabidiol via acid catalyzed intramolecular cyclization to THC isomers. And so what you could see here is that, yes, they talk about, you know, conversion to Delta 9 and Delta 8, but they also show these 2 other iso isomers, right, which are formed in the reaction depending on the conditions. So depending on the conditions that you use, there's 2 double bonds and there's 2 hydroxyl groups. One pathway A, leads to these iso products, and pathway B leads to the normal products that you find in the plant, which are the THC configured materials, realizing that delta 9 is first made, and then under further acidic conditions, you just see isomerization to the more thermodynamically favored. This is where the plant ends, and the plant is able to do this chemistry because it's in a chiral enzymatic environment where these molecules are being made and expressed, not in a reaction flask. But this gives you an idea. So you start with CBD, and again, I think Dustin, you pointed out, because of the glut of CBD isolate on the market and the promise that this was going to be some big opportunity, people can now take CBD and convert it into THC and put it into products that get people really high because they have THC isomers in it. But what you could see here, if you look at this table, is that you get a plethora of different products in this reaction. And even if you take their best result here is right here, 93% delta 8 THC. Well, my question is, what's the other 7%? And in fact, they're quantifying the iso-THC isomers. So it's not the iso-THC isomers in this case. There's just 7% other stuff. So you have to assume that in that case, they're actually doing some kind of chromatography to clean it out, to turn that 93 into something like 98 or 99% plus. So you only have a very limited amount of what the unknown material is at. So if people can make delta 8, a cannabinoid, that pure, I'm all about using that as another, as Marcus would say, another arrow in the quiver of being another cannabinoid that we can make. But look at the reaction conditions here. They're using a Lewis acid called TMS triflate. That's trimethylsilyl triflate. Oh man, that's not only a really nasty Lewis acid that you can't use at larger scale, that's something that's prohibitively expensive, and you would never use this in a commercial process. You would try to get away with some cheap acid like sulfuric or some acid that you can just throw away and not have to recover, but you would, and dichloromethane, a chlorinated solvent at -10, no fucking way, right? So when you look at, you could find a process by which you can make a pure cannabinoid, but the wonderful thing about this for researchers like myself is that they're forced to publish in peer-reviewed literature where they have to show their data. And let me just show you one quick thing. So y'all know that I love NMR. NMR is nuclear magnetic resonance. And what you're looking at right here is the proton spectrum for purified delta 9 THC. So this is what's great about 4200 and Hash Church and the literature, is that, you know, as cannabinoid scientists, we do have a crystal ball, and it's called the literature, and we could look into the literature and find things like this. So this is great for me because I can look at my spectra and I can compare it to this like a fingerprint and see like how clean something is or how unclean something is. And what I want to show you here is that, so this is the proton spectrum, and this peak right here, this one right here at about 6.3 corresponds to the vinylic proton that's right here. When you isomerize delta 9 over into delta 8, that proton shifts about, okay, here it is right here. It shifts from 6.3, it was over here, to about 5.4. So I can use NMR as a diagnostic tool to say, do I have delta 8? Do I have delta 9? Just like you can use HPLC. But what's even more important is, like, when you look at HPLC, especially if you have the sensitivity of like a mass spectrometer, you can find all of these trace compounds. And I want to just point out one more paper from Mechoulam because I love this paper. In this paper, what he was doing was he was actually using a stoichiometric oxidation to make CBN. You know, a lot of people are interested in CBN. He was using a dicyanodichloroquinone, which is a really nasty oxidant reagent, to basically convert delta-9 THC into CBN. But I love what he says about the reaction, and you could just picture Rafi saying this because he's such a humble guy. Where is it? I'm looking for the quote exactly, but he basically says that, well, you can't use this method because it's a really toxic method. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is because, again, what you'll see on 4200 and you'll see on other forums is that, oh, there's a literature method to make this. There's a literature method to make this. What they don't realize is that these literature methods are not production processes to make pharmaceutical type compounds for human ingestion. These are to make little amounts of milligrams of stuff to put it into testing in mice and other types of pharmaceutical type testing before it's actually developed. And I think the good thing about 4200 when I see it is that there are a lot of people who are chiming in, and I can tell just from Ion Trap's what he's posting is, well, the guy's really knowledgeable. He's been in cannabinoid science for a long time. So I like having a dialogue with someone like that. But yeah, does he have a dog in the fight? You start reading through that thread and you're like, well, there is a clean, compliant way. In fact, Dustin, am I right? That's the title of the thread. The title of the thread is a clean, compliant way to make Delta-8. So the guy kind of has a dog in the fight. I don't have a dog in this fight. So, but you know, I do agree with him that it's bogus that people who are flying below regulation, who aren't regulated in this industry, are basically selling a chemical reaction product that's no longer a cannabinoid extract and whose safety could, you know, whether those things are in there or not, Dustin, I think the discussion that we're having right now is more important to make sure that you don't just say, okay, Delta-8 sucks. Delta-8 has to be regulated like Delta-9. Unfortunately, now, if they knock it off the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act, I mean, that's one of the biggest problems with Delta-8 is it's mentioned by name in the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act under Code 7370 as a tetrahydrocannabinol. End of fucking story. That puts it outside the provisions of the Farm Bill in my non-legal sense, but you know.
Yeah, well, the government really just put its foot in its mouth.
I'm going to get a drink of water. I'll be right back.
On that whole deal on one hand, they passed off regulation of hemp over, and that set this precedent. And then within that says, and all analogs of, within the hemp bill says that of CBD. And since I can get to D8 from CBD, that's why it's been allowed and spread so wide, because there is a legal discrepancy in Delta-8. Up until now, that states are giving specific exclusions to D8, but not the federal government. The individual states are making these decisions, which is within the rights of a state for sure.
Isn't it true that people have been extracting THC and CBD from more hempy type products, but then they either separate the THC or they concentrate it so that instead of being 0.3%, it's more like, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20. And they think it's somehow legal under the Farm Act.
Yeah, no, that's illegal.
So this distillate before remediated had about 4% by weight percent THC in it. Now it has no measurable amount of THC in it because it's gone through a process called remediation, which is a non-chromatographic process where they use heat to basically convert the THC over to CBN. And at some point, it's so funny, I wouldn't say it's funny, but everyone was like, oh man, CBN, man, there's actually genuine interest in CBN because CBN does have a lot of interesting properties. Everyone always thinks it's the sleep cannabinoid, but I can only find there's like one study in the literature, and it's like 20 years old. So that's crystalline CBN. So most of the conventional knowledge, Sam, was that CBN was just some dark tarry stuff, but no, it's the white crystalline solid, as you know it is.
The first CBN I had that was pure was white. Absolutely.
Right. And other thing, so he's showing, so who's making that isolate right there, Dustin? You're muted.
We make this one at Future Compounds, which is our kind of compounding lab in Vegas.
That's CBN isolate.
You held up several tubes. One was dark colored. Which one was that?
This is the CBN distillate, and so this one.
Okay, I get it.
Yep. So this is like right after the conversion. It's still a distillate. It has not been washed yet either. We do several liquid to liquid separations throughout the process to add or extract various the reactants.
What's the percentage at that point of CBN purity in the distillate?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It's only tared. I'm not involved
in
the
day-to-day
white
crystalline but stuff is easy to say 98, 99% pure. I mean,
99 plus, yeah.
White and crystalline like that.
Sure. Yep.
Do you have CBC?
Not in bulk currently.
Or CBCA?
Definitely not. Not yet.
So Sam, is CBC also a white solid?
Yes, you can, if you get it. CBCA, I believe, was. I don't remember with CBC.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there is CBC isolate out there, is there?
I don't think
anything's possible.
Right.
He's not wrong.
Have the genetics caught up yet? Genetics or synthesis, that's how you're going to get it, right?
Right. I mean, the cheap way is with genetics. Once you've got a variety that produces CBD, if you don't have a THC problem with it, then it just gets mass produced until, the bubble pops.
Right. Well, I thought we were talking about this at last Hash Church. There is some tech that talked about conversion of CBD to CBC.
Mark, I think it's CBG over to CBC.
Okay.
Well, you know me, I'm just a simple plant guy. The chemistry I leave to smarter folks like you folks.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not necessarily smarter, but it's a little more detailed. I mean, the cool thing is, again, so Dustin, was this some of the literature that you kind of started with here, the Meshulam stuff, or where did you, when you started your deep dive, where did you begin?
Oh, just in general?
Yeah.
So first Google Scholar. And then of course, if you spend any time over there, you're going to come up with a bunch of Meshulam. And then I also purchased a book. I was at a bookstore in Seattle, and it is it's the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, volume 191, issue 1, Marijuana Chemistry, Pharmacology, and Patterns of Social Use, December 1971. And it was it was the last time that they were going to meet and talk about cannabis. They were all shutting down all of their cannabis research because the government was no longer, that's when everything changed and they weren't allowed to do, research anymore. And so it was like just a dump of everything they had. And they're like, look, we're getting rid of this and we're moving on to other things. So here's everything that we know. And some of the things that I found really interesting in there was they had made every single different kind of cannabinoid they could theoretically come up with, right? They're throwing random shit at it. Oh, here's all these new ones. We'd isolated it down. And then they were taking that and feeding it to like dogs and feeding it, injecting it, smoking them in a little box, dogs and rats and monkeys and all sorts of stuff. And some of the cannabinoids that they listed in this book are wild and just killed the animals dead. No problem. Like, oh, they're dead. You could definitely overdose on that one. So that, and at that time we were doing pretty large scale, like this bucket tech, backyard ethanol, and then doing a crude, to crude and then distillation. And we just started getting into photons, throw the bleaching clay into the boiling flask. And it right there when I read that, I was like, oh shit, what if I'm making something that's going to kill all these dumb monkeys? Like, that's not going to be good. So I went on.
It makes sense because again, when you treat these things with acid, THC in the delta 9 configuration is only metastable, and converting over to delta 8, people were always under this misconception that delta 8 is made in the plant. It's not made in the plant. The biosynthetic pathway ends at delta 9 configured cannabinoids, and any conversion over to delta 8 is just adventitious from humans fucking with it, right? So it's kind of like you get to the point where, well, okay, so what that means is over the millennia and humans using cannabis, people have consumed delta 8. Delta 8 is a minor cannabinoid that's part of that gamish. Yeah, it's a degradation component, but so are all those hydroxylated cannabinoids that El Soli keeps finding on his moldy weed, So all those degradation components, are they really going to, get you? If you look at it, actually, it's interesting. So if you look at those El Soli hydroxylated intermediates, they're all hydroxylated, which, by the way, is a hallmark of biological degradation, oxidation. They're all hydroxylated in and around that cyclohexane ring, right? Because it's trying to turn the thing into biofood or whatever. But ultimately, all of those things are going to thermally eliminate to give CBN. So like you could smoke University of Mississippi's moldy weed with those hydroxylated things, but what you're going to get when you inhale that is CBN, because at nail temperature, those things are all going to thermally dehydrate and make CBN. So there's a
I always said that CBN got me loaded, but it didn't get me high.
Yeah, there you go. Right, exactly. Loaded but not high. That's a good way to describe it. But like Sam, when those guys were discovering these new cannabinoids and saying, oh, look at all these, it's funny that those are only found on the cannabinoids or on the cannabis that they grow down at the University of Mississippi. So,
and that just changed, right? That just opened up. They just gave out multiple more licenses. Did Dr. Sue get one?
They did. I don't know. I hadn't been following that close enough. Maybe 18.
It changed like a week ago. The guy was on the founder of MAPS was on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about it as well. He got his license that they applied for in like 2001.
Dr. Sue is one of those that is
excellent. I knew she was top of the list.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think I think it was Sue who kind of blew the whistle on the fact that a lot of that cannabis was moldy.
She sued him. she sued the shit
out of him. It caused a lot of controversy because people thought, oh, government weed must be fine, but as we know, because I tested it back in 2009 or 2010, and it failed molds and mildews.
My point more eloquently made is that even when the stuff goes moldy, those compounds are just fine and safe for humans, right?
Because they're stable.
Yeah, who was the guy who got the can of joints every day, or what was his name?
Robert Randall.
Well, Robert Randall was patient one, but currently there's one patient, Irv Rosenfeld, out of Florida.
Right. So there's people who smoke that weed like it's no tomorrow, right? And
dude, he was loving it. We had a whole conversation with him, and it actually made me think a lot. Because of course, this is back when Todd was on the show. We're all like, dude, we got to get you better weed. We're going to figure this out. Like, you need better weed. And he was like, listen, guys, this weed is perfect for me. Like, it's just, I really quite enjoy it. And we were all just like.
I had a similar discussion with Robert Randall when he was still alive. And I said, well, if marijuana has all this great benefits for glaucoma for you, then wouldn't hashish be even better? And he actually looked at me straight in the face and says, hashish doesn't have medical benefit. And I was quite shocked and quite surprised and didn't really want to argue with him, but yeah, that was his personal belief.
You got to understand, they have to sort of be representatives since they received medicine. They can't necessarily go out and shit on it completely. You know what I'm saying? I think
no, I mean, Robert, he's the one who stepped
out.
No.
Robert, I'm just talking in Irvin Spence, because I've had multiple conversations with
Irvin, yes.
Specifically. I'm not talking Robert. Robert, rest in peace. But although we do work with Alice, she's been assisting us veterans in all of our different filings and keeping us up to date. So, you know, the 20th anniversary of his death just passed on the 2nd. Yeah. So rest in peace, Robert.
Shit really hit the fan. Okay, so he got it, and I think 8 or 10 or whatever other compassionate programs were available for cannabis from the government. But then he showed the AIDS community how to apply, and there were like 1,000 applications, and the federal government stopped the compassionate program altogether, but it grandmothered those 8 or whatever it was into the program for life.
And now it's down to 1.
Hey, Mark, that link I just posted into the chat is Mescaline 68, chloranil dehydrogenation of cannabinoids, total synthesis of cannabichromine. So it's he did CBC, and it looks like, I think he starts it from THC, and then he goes from THC to CBN, and then from CBN to CBC, I believe.
Yeah, I've read every one of his papers. I'll have to admit, I've read several of his papers several times. Sometimes I go back and I read them again, just to read them again. I've read his papers so much I could hear him speaking as he's writing these things, and it's just the connection that we have with the chemical literature, which is just fantastic. And I think, like, what I always sensed from Hash Church, like in the early days when Horatio said, "Hey, Mark, you got to come on because Tony was talking bullshit," and he wanted me to set Tony straight. You know, he's like, "Tony's talking terpenes, man. Will you come on Hash Church and get this guy grounded on science?" So yeah, I always knew that there was so much kind of like interest and kind of hunger from the community that wanted to know all of this stuff, like that Mescaline did back in the 60s and then Adams did back in the 30s, man. I mean, it is just really, to me, just fascinating, because I think they knew the importance of the chemistry that they were doing. I think the thing that really made Adams's chemistry just kind of go away was World War II, right? I mean, he published like 13 papers in less than 3 years between 1939 and 1941. Then the World War II happened and they just kind of forgot about it. But, you know, Mescaline, I think in his movie, he talks about this. He tried to write off for NIH funding in the early 60s to study the chemistry of the cannabis plant, and the NIH was like, go blow. Then after he reported Delta-9 isolated, they came over and smuggled the 10 grams that he had made back to Bethesda and did all kinds of secret government work in the NIH on it, where they came up with Axelrod's patent, you know, on neuroprotection. And so, like, there's this whole secret agenda that the government had on cannabis while they were locking up hippies because Richard Nixon thought that smoking weed was the end of the United States, you know? So, you know, it even goes back further than that, back to the original reefer madness bullshit. But man, where we are today, think about where we are today. I mean, even in my lifetime, I was born in 62. I know Sam's got me beat by about 10 years, but, you know, we even go back just even half a century to where we are now, to where people are doing research, to where I'm reading, I just read this paper about MDMA to treat PTSD. I mean, it's fucking amazing, right? Where we are today in the use of, psychedelics and cannabinoids. and just a great place where we are right now. Thanks to people like Marcus for putting Hash Church and you for putting 4200 together to educate the community, because a rising tide rises all boats.
I like to share the information. I like all the different discussions. It's, for quite a while, Dragonfly Earth Medicine was in the chat kind of going like, fuck putting chemicals on shit, and like, no, that's the whole plant is better medicine. And I totally get that perspective. And I'm not like, I just find it super interesting, all of this information and taking apart the plant and learning about it and sort of expanding our knowledge on it. I do also see value in it, for the science alone, but also for specific sort of patients. Like, yeah, of course, listen, if you can get some beautifully living soil, organic, fed whole plant medicine, or an extract through water extraction or something, yeah, that's amazing. But the example I always use is that the profiles change, and that they're hard to reformulate if you don't do things like this. And there are, like Halley's Comet, which John could speak of as well, that sometimes that would work, and then sometimes it wouldn't work, and it would just change the slightest little bit in maybe the grow room variable. And now her medicine no longer worked, and her seizures were are super serious. They're not lightweight seizures. These are like, potential life ending critical style seizures. And so to be able to like find exactly what works for her, and then be able to just take plants apart, maybe multiple plants, to put that profile together, make it accurate, and be able to give that to her. Like, to me, I see a value in that. And I think I get where they're coming from. They're very passionate about that side. And I hope they come in later and share with us about that side. But you got to be careful when you're super passionate about one side, that you're not making a bunch of assumptions and repelling the other side. What Hash Church has taught me is to be more open. Like, am I dabbing on distillate right now? Like, no, I'm dabbing on 6-star bubble hash, and that's okay. But we've got to allow the conversation, at least amongst ourselves, to be able to discuss these things. And that's all I'll say about it.
Look, I like fresh rainwater straight from the spring. It's beautiful. But I also like pickles, and I have to take that water, mix it with pickles, do a process to end up with those pickles. Both are great. Doesn't mean I sometimes don't want water and sometimes I want pickle juice, but I had to go through the process, this fermentation or this salting process. This is life. This is what humans do. We take things and we play with it and we change it. And sometimes we end up with things like Delta-8 that might be beautiful medicine for a child getting chemo, right? Like, there are high uses for these cannabinoids. Like you said, you're never going to get the Delta-8 by growing the most headiest plant you ever grew. I'm a permaculturist, 100%. I want all of my weed that I'm going to consume to come from Dragonfly. Yes, that's great. But I might also take some of that and turn a little bit into D8. And if that means we can't be friends, then so be it. But it doesn't mean it's going to stop me from doing it.
For sure. Well, they're going to come in later. They're just really busy right now. So
great. We're excellent.
Yeah, they're good folks. They're the greatest of folks. I could feel his passion. I know also that their souls are absolutely being crushed right now by the last 2.7% of our rainforests in British Columbia. Our elder forests are getting. So I'm hoping they're kind of going to come in as well.
Dustin, do you know that you're sharing your screen?
It's pretty fucked up situation that's going on here in BC.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too. But
okay, go ahead, man.
So I want to let's circle back on the trees too, because we have the same thing happening down here in Washington.
Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, so let me move. There we go.
Take it off, Colin.
Out of the way.
Yeah, I got to get going, boys. It was everyone. It was really nice to see you all. I'll catch you guys on the next show. I gotta get it ready to fly. So
take care, Colin.
Have a beautiful, beautiful Sunday, everyone.
Peace out, brother.
Peace out, brother. Have a good day.
Yeah. So we got right here. It says CBG, Cannabigero, and they label it as VII. Goes to Yeah, dehydrogenated with chloranil in benzene, which, like you were talking about, yuck. And then they explain how and why it ends up converting itself to cannabichromene, which they've labeled as VIII, in a pretty decent yield, especially since we can now bulk grow CBG in the field. And here is you can just see the move. Here's VII. So CBG goes with chloranil in that benzene soup to
Yeah, so let's just talk about chloranil for a second. So this is a chlorinated aromatic that basically makes dioxin type compounds when it's consumed. I mean, if you're going to make this in a laboratory, it's one thing. If you're going to make this for human ingestion, got to be something just completely different. The other thing that I would worry about with this kind of thing is that, the reason why I pointed this out, Dustin, is just as an example. Here's literature where you could say, okay, there's a method out there. That's it. That's all I need to know, right? So a guy in a warehouse or in a garage would say, well, here's a method. What equipment do I need? Let's piece it together. Let's figure this shit out. He did it, so we can do it. I guess the other important thing, and again, I know Colin would agree with me that one of the big issues, I think, is not just necessarily the way that you're making this, but being able to have the intellectual capacity to understand that you need to develop a process for commercialization, run it several times. Whenever you run a commercial process, I think, Marcus, you'd probably agree with me, especially when it comes to stuff that's related to cannabis. So there's variables in it that sometimes subtly change. We can't tell with our naked eye, or it takes very sophisticated looking at many different properties to be able to reproduce a process time and time again to make the consistency that you need for something that's going to go into people. Right. And so not only do you need the analytical controls, but you need to be able to run that process 4 and 5 times, look at the data and see what kind of spread you get. So like in a process like this, where it says, I don't know, 95% yield. Well, what if you run it again and next time it's 98? Or what if you run it next time it's 88? So you're going to have this constantly moving thing that you need to be able to standardize. And the thing that I really don't like about using a stoichiometric oxidant like this is it makes stoichiometric waste. In this case, it's chlorinated, halogenated chlorinated waste. Chlorinated phenols are the synthetic precursors to dioxins. So these things, if they haven't made dioxins, will go to a landfill and make dioxins in a landfill. This is just not good, not practical, would never be scaled up commercially today. That's
sure. And sorry, I got to echo things. No, sure it's fine. So yeah, this is how we got to Delta 8, right? Oh, well, no, we got to Delta 8 on accident. But once we realized what we were doing, this is how we progressed Delta 8. We went into the literature, saw that they were doing crazy things with crazy solvents and acids that most of us can't even get our hands on. So that's step one. Most of these, and that's changing as these, like our future compounds lab, we now have access to quite a bit of stuff, but we've never sold any of our intermediates and never would, because it's not safe. It needs a lot of cleanup. There's lots of processes. And yes, we obviously want to use the cheapest, safest solvents and acids possible. And that's always where we start and work in that direction.
Dustin, look what he says right here on this paragraph to the right. Work done by our group and others has shown that 1, which is Delta 9, can be readily isomerized to Delta 2 in the presence of paratoluene sulfonic acid and nearly quantitative yield. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
PTSA right there.
Whoa, that's it. They're off to the races. They're a chemist now, right?
Yep. And
we just made a chemist out of a bunch of people by listening to that. Right?
Yep. There's the secret. There's the big giant secret right there. That's made a lot of people a lot of money in the last couple of years.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to keep hijacking the conversation, Marcus.
This is a fun.
Not at all, man. I'm chatting in the chat room. You guys keep going. Great.
Yeah, and you're right about the waste products, because you can get all of this to a safe spot. Now, could you do that, cost effectively? I don't know, but you can, wash, scrub, pass through chroma, get it to an isolated compound. Like we take this isolate that's at 99.8% or 99.9% in a CBN isolate, right? There could have been lots of nasty shit happening before that now is not present in this, right? I mean, it's not radioactive. And besides that, at this purity, disregarding the idea that we're throwing away a bunch of nasty shit, or in theory, we're throwing a bunch of nasty shit. We have to have a pretty clean process for this CBN, but right. Like when we read through this literature, some of these, and they go through, a lot of this, they get to an isolate point and then are checking it on NMR. That they say that at the beginning of this paper. That's how they've confirmed. So they're getting this stuff to some ultra purity, right? Mm-hmm. That CBC that they made with this nasty process that they got to purity would, in theory, be safe to consume, right?
Yeah, but again, to use chromatography on the laboratory scale, where you're just,
of course,
putting a column together with 60 grams of silica, if you had to do that and make, several hundred kilos of material, it would be not only cost prohibitive, but I mean, the process chemistry and the equipment that you would need takes a substantial investment.
Of course. But now, let's just compare it to pharmaceutical. There are certain drugs that are insanely expensive because the only way that they can get there, politics aside, the only way they can get there is through that investment that you said. It took so much money to scale up this entire thing that when we get this 1% of 1% yield, that's the magical medicine. Now, that may have gone through a nasty process to get there, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're discovering a medicine, there's usually two phases. There's a discovery. You do a lot of discovery and you try to find new structures and you make a lot of different compounds, basically assembling Legos in different ways. Then when you find your set of Legos, you take that into what's called lead development. So you find out that not only has the biological activity you're looking for, but hopefully some sort of safety assessment or safety assessment on the metabolites of when somebody eats this as a pill, what's going to happen inside the body. And you look at a lot of different things when it comes to safety assessment, because again, a drug is not a food ingredient, but again, the pharmaceutical mantra is to certainly hook you for life and to make sure that you have to take this medicine for the rest of your life. I would assume that, again, the discovery phase can use all kinds of chemistry to get there to discover the molecule. But then the most important phase is the development phase, which is where you take that initial molecule or compound that's been discovered, and now think about how do we actually make a manufacturing process to make this. And we're not going to necessarily use the laboratory synthesis to make it, because the laboratory synthesis uses all this toxic, expensive crap that we can't use on the shit ton scale. And to make this drug, we need to make it on a shit ton scale. And we can't just create a bunch of, for every 1 pound of product, you create 20 pounds of waste. That doesn't work.
So Mark, when they're doing that process, before they go to the manufacturing scale, they've done their safety testing, right?
Well, typically you do
initial research,
you do
testing.
Lots of testing. Recording stopped? No way.
We're out.
Are we out?
I don't know.
No. Recording in progress. There we go.
The button was pressed.
I don't know how that happened, but yeah, I restarted. Now I'm going to have to upload this in like 2 podcasts. Damn. I
part
can
one and
spice
part
it.
two.
Continue on, gentlemen. Maybe if you're not,
two.
one sec, if you're not going to continue to share the screen, because that's all anyone can see right now.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So just,
there you
just
go.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
We just need to make the second half better than the first half. That way everybody won't even tune in to the first half. They'll just go right to the hardcore.
And it's actually 1 minute warning. It's going to be 4:20 in Cape Verdew in 1 minute, 47 seconds. So let's do a
Mark, my last point on that, and we can move on, is that in the lab, they're doing that maybe a nasty workup to get there, but that compound then what they're doing the initial round of safety testing on? Like, we have this isolated drug that was made with all these fluorinated whatever. So safety is based on the nastiest, and then I'm sure they progress and they're doing continuous safety. So, but in theory, the drugs may even get safer than when they started because they were made with a cleaner process.
Ideally, the discovery compound is purified to absolute purity, 100% purity. So there is
it doesn't matter.
Crap. It doesn't
That's
matter,
the point
right?
I was trying to get to. So if you're going through that CBC made with that nasty process I just had shared, if was brought to purity, cost, who cares? Because maybe it's the elixir of life, right? And I'm a rich guy. Maybe I'm going to try CBC first and see if it lets me live forever. So I'm willing to spend whatever to get to an ultra pure. I don't care how nasty the process was.
Well, maybe you could run it through the wiper a bunch of times, clean it up enough, and then make a distillate and crash it out. Who knows? But I think the point is, and Marcus, we can move on after this. I hate to belabor this point, but I think the 4200 discussion, is more along the lines of, this is why we need it. It needs to be produced in a regulated environment because of all these potential things that could potentially happen. Is this guy right that he says, oh, my method works, but everybody else's method shits on everybody else, says that everybody else has got toxic shit, but his stuff, oh, it's really clean. We don't know. But if it's all manufactured in a regulated environment, it would be done so in a way where we would know what the right SOP is that makes something that's safe for human consumption. And hopefully they would have the right analytical techniques in there to know when a batch does not meet product specification and you got to throw it away. Right now, when a product doesn't meet product specification for vape, I think they put it into gummies. That's like the solution of, oh, I can't get this through a vape COA manufacturer because they're going to look at it and say, what's all this other crap in there? But you put it into some dark oil and put it into gummies or chocolates and it's okay,
Dilution is a solution to pollution, my friend.
Yeah. Anyway.
What do you have to say about that, Mike West? You're being quiet over there. I feel like you got some things to say.
Yeah, I think ultimately a lot of the hemp processors had to look at, as they're processing and working up hemp, you are going to be trying to isolate them, in general, CBD. That CBD during the isolation, you're going to obviously pull off the other cannabinoids, which saw the increased valuation, but also saw the development of accumulation of THC that then had to get remediated. And people have looked at, obviously turning those other cannabinoids into potential revenue streams, right? So many of these hemp labs are trying to generate revenue streams in their own unique way, whether by isolating or remediating or converting those cannabinoids into other cannabinoids and formulating them into different products. And that's one of those things that can be done safely, but obviously I agree with Dr. Mark, needs to be done in a regulated environment, because we don't want products being sold at gas stations that haven't been produced and been COA, because there's obvious legal ramifications if somebody who, let's say we're producing it and it's a product that causes somebody who eats a gummy bear at a truck station to become intoxicated due to some side effect that could create liabilities for the gummy manufacturer or whatever product manufacturer, and those lawsuits have yet to happen. So this is kind of a precautionary tale that we don't want to see that come back and bite our industry in the ass and create these legal ramifications. And we're starting to see that there, with the development of CBC and Delta 8, it's a wonderful way that we can mitigate THC as well as, convert some of the CBD into new products. But obviously, if we try and distribute them freely instead of, say, distributing them in adult only venues, then it can create a unwanted attention that comes back and ends up generating negative publicity, which leads to negative regulatory environments, right? And there's been some states that have now passed bans on Delta 8, even though I would say that Delta 8 is probably a lower risk than the recreational THC that's found in Colorado. So,
hey, Mike, I was on a Zoom call the other night with a group of cannabis executives, both on the hemp and on the cannabis side. And the fellow who invited me on wanted me to kind of break down Delta 8. And one of the stories that was shared was an executive who, again, is well versed in the cannabis space and a longtime user and a CEO of a large cannabis company in California, and traveled to an area and bought some. Actually, no, what he told me was they went to the vaping expo, which is typically mostly nicotine products and device manufacturers and whatnot, people who work in those supply chains. And he said this year it was very different. He said it was 20% nicotine, 80% Delta 8. 80% of the people at the vaping thing were all Delta 8 hustlers or Delta 8 product manufacturers or whatever. So he brought back a couple products back on the plane to California with him, and he showed an energy shot that he said, yeah, he had, first class tickets, so he had a really comfortable seat and everything. Took a shot, and he said about 10 to 15 minutes later, he had an incredible feeling of wonderful euphoria like he'd never experienced with Delta 9. And being a longtime user, he's like, wow, this stuff's great. It's like, this is wonderful because it tastes good, so he took a few more sips of it. Well, he said about 10 minutes later, he started feeling a knot in his stomach. About 20 minutes later, he broke out into a cold sweat. And for the last 3 hours of that cross-country flight, he said it was the most miserable flight he'd ever been on before. He was incredibly high, had a feeling of anxiety and paranoia, and was just thinking, oh my God, this is sold at bodegas and gas stations to 16-year-old kids. And it gets you fucking loaded, dude. And it's probably chuck loaded with that iso-THC isomer, which we don't know what kind of impact that has on long-term and short-term health. And so you're absolutely right. This does need to be regulated because, and I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the biggest markets for Delta 8 now are some of the most cannabis unfriendly states. There's the states that don't have a strong Delta 9 lobby. If you see like what's happened in Colorado and what I believe was happening in the other states is the Delta 9 lobby doesn't want Delta 8 at all, right? They want there's a certain level of rigor when it comes to Delta 9 production that's just not applied to Delta 8. So I hate to sit on a cannabinoid because I know it's safe and I know it's a good cannabinoid and I know it's good for those kids. But it's just so unfortunate that we're in this situation that's only been made possible through the ridiculousness of prohibition itself, that we're stuck in this current situation. I don't really know how it will resolve.
Yeah, when Canada passed the regulations for THC on the federal level, they made it actually not just THC, but the extraction of all cannabinoids. So if you're going to do any of the cannabinoids, CBD or THC, it all falls under the recreational processing licenses. You can separately get licensed for production or processing of hemp, but the minute you start extracting it, then you have to have the regulatory licenses. So ultimately that's one of the things that has yet to be addressed. Once you have the FDA involved, whether it be a food product or a drug product, topical or ingestible or inhalable otherwise, they're going to have to implement some production regulatory environments, and that's in general going to require a requirement of COA, right? You're going to have to be able to have a COA, and that's going to be not only required by your insurance broker, but also by the Federal Regulatory Commission in the U.S. That's going to be the FDA, potentially the DEA or HEF, but it's one of those things that's regulated. If we're doing a caffeinated beverage, or a THC beverage, you got to make sure that beverage is not going to be poisoning your customers, because the regulatory requirements are going to make your insurance too expensive. Plus, bad press, poison your customers, you're going out of business, right? So it's one of those things in the unregulated industry, which, a lot of the hemp processors kind of fall in that legal gray area where they're operating with a state hemp license, but many of those state hemp licenses that regulatory framework doesn't cover all of the, not only the extraction, but chemosynthesis. So I think that as the Food and Drug Administration gets involved on a federal level, that you're going to start to see, CBD, THC, all the isomerization, acetylcholine, and other, chemosynthetic conversions require safety trials before they go to a commercial market. And that's something that can be done at universities here in Canada. But when we were trying to do them down in the States, we ended up having to look at doing those product trials abroad, because doing research at universities is difficult with the night of monopoly. We hope that with this news a couple weeks ago, that's going to open up the door, because we'll actually, some of the licensed producers will be able to actually work and develop genetics that are formulated. We can extract and formulate them and prepare them, but I mean, it's a long time coming, and we don't want to hold our breath we don't want to tell the patients to hold their breath to be able to formulate these products for them. So until the federal regulatory framework comes out, we kind of need to use these forums, peer review and peer self-regulate, and use that self-regulation to create a better industry that can set an example, so that we can educate the regulators on what needs to be included. I'm actually quite appalled that there's still states. Some of the licensed states that allow recreational still don't require pesticide testing. Some of them did. And there's been ebbs and flows. Washington had an outright ban on aerobic bacteria, which was really bad for the organic farmers. And then a couple of years after regulation on the recreational level, they allowed some bacteria, but they just required you to test for the mycotoxins. So I think, and then other places, Oregon's always had a fairly strict pesticide thing, but I don't think Oregon required heavy metals in the first round, heavy metal testing. And then some of the other states, California's kind of had more progressive. They started fairly loose in the medical scene, and as its transition to recreational, testing's gotten a lot stricter. So I think each of those states are acting as laboratories of democracy, and I have no doubt the feds are paying attention to seeing what's happening in each of those states, and working on a federal level to figure out how they're going to create those regulations. But
yes, to everything you said.
Yes. So I mean, and ultimately, Mark, I mean, because it is chemosynthesis, right? It's not just extraction.
Well, yeah, the conversion. Well, it's interesting because Dustin started talking about just basically the isomerization of delta 8, and so, or I'm sorry, the isomerization of delta 9, right? So just starting with extract and distilling it down to a crude, and now you have delta 9. Well, now all I'm going to do is throw a little bit of dirt, i.e. clay, at this, which is just bentonite clay. That's what these acidic clays are. If you push a roller coaster down the hill, it goes down the hill and it doesn't come back. So that's the thing with delta 9 going to delta 8. And so I think that way of making delta 8 and enriching a distillate sample with delta 8 is inherently more safer than a chemical conversion of CBD isolate through delta 8 or to delta 8. I don't know if I just confused everyone. So converting delta 9 into delta 8, I think is safer than converting CBD into delta 8. Does that make sense, Dustin?
Just like a full spectrum,
Dustin, you're muted.
Let's say a CBC hash that's organically grown hash. If it's grown organically and it's a cultivar that naturally expresses those cannabinoids and terpenes, it would be preferable to process them, naturally, right? As opposed to having to worry about, taking another cannabinoid to go through the dirty chemistry, which can be cleaned up, but then you have waste products, and we as environmentalists want to minimize those waste products. So
right, it's no longer an extract. And I guess, again, on the other side, I'll say, well, I'm just going to take an extract and throw something natural like clay, which is acidic, not realizing that also cleaning up the color is converting this extract. I guess that's better because you can't form the other iso-THC that way because the THC ring structure is already formed, I guess. So I'm inherently just thinking that that's a safer way. So if you have to make delta 8, have a delta 9 license and convert some of your delta 9 to delta 8, and you're good with Dr. Mark.
Yeah, and you can even I've put crude in a apparatus and distilled over, and it made delta 8 with no presence of anything other than just the crude, and it was just like
just heat.
Kind of a
heat.
Yeah, just heat and whatever came off the plant.
Heat was basically the wheels of the roller coaster going down the hill. You can use acid. So what acid does is acid makes the hill that the roller coaster goes down smaller. Acid lowers the activation energy in between delta 8 and delta 9. But what you're doing with heat is you're just pushing it down the hill. In fact, you got to remember, you did that in glassware, right, Dustin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Glassware is acidic. Glassware, essentially, in and of itself, is silicic acid, right? So silicic acid is an acid, right? So glassware itself could catalyze this reaction.
Mark, you shared a paper with me that was basically just heat turning CBD into all sorts of crazy different cannabinoids, right? And just through heat alone. So if I'm smoking a bowl in a glass pipe, I'm getting all sorts of cannabinoid conversions just from the heat right there into my lungs.
You could, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a guy out there, Marcus Rogan. I didn't see his talk, but he gave a talk last week or a couple of weeks ago about he's doing some aerosolization studies, or I don't know if he's got the joint smoking machine or is
that at UBC?
Yeah, that guy.
Right. Yeah.
So he's doing, Marcus, what he claims is that the THC never vaporizes and never reaches its boiling point, and it's some aerosol formation of liquid THC in weed smoke. So I don't know. I mean, the other interesting aspect about it is he said that, he's like, what is, joint smoke is not hot enough to vaporize THC. And it's like, wait a second, are you talking about the actual hots of the joint? That's thousands of degrees, man.
That's Marcus Rogan, right? Dr. Marcus Rogan.
That guy.
Yeah, you know what? I was like, this sounds really familiar. So I went into my phone and my emails, and I reached out to him on February 27th. He got back to me, and I guess I just sort of spaced he got back to me twice. So now I'm going to have to send him back an email.
Yeah, he'd be an interesting guy to get on church. I know him, truth be told, but I think some of his ideas are a little flaky at best, and just they're not always scientifically grounded. So it would make for a very interesting, lively hash church discussion with Dr. Rogan.
Well, now you've called him out, so.
Yeah, I know. He's going to kill me now. Right? No, but I'm just saying, to come up with this concept that you're not actually vaporizing THC, it's like, well, okay, then how does my dab rig work? Tell me exactly. I'm creating some kind of aerosol that jets through the water. I don't know. It just doesn't sound grounded to me. But,
hey, I want to welcome best friend in the house and Dragonfly Earth Medicine. Welcome, guys.
Hey there.
What's going on, dude?
Hey, Josh and Kelly, how are you?
Farming.
Just farming. I feel like that's what you guys are up to. Farming. That's what farmers do. Is that what the Dragonfly Earth Medicine farm crew has been up to as well? You look frozen. Maybe I'm frozen. No, everyone else is moving.
No, you're not frozen.
Keeping everything dialed in and
not much downtime.
And watered and hopefully our internet good enough.
I challenge Solo Cup Grow.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. You were frozen and I couldn't hear you, and then I suddenly heard you while I was okay. Yes, I think you're coming through better now. Let's give that a shot.
I'm not sure if it's working, but it's like a psychedelic experience to see if you're like hearing us or if we're talking, and it's like glitchy. It's like, oh shit, and then you're on time and you're off time. It's like, fuck, you know. But big love and respect to everyone here today, and we appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, and just wanted to say, you know, in response to what you were saying, Marcus, we do feel like, you know, these conversations are incredibly important. We do feel like all facets of the wheel need to be discussed in order to understand how it rolls evenly and equally. You know, it's like the Dharma wheel. If all the spokes on the Dharma wheel are not taut perfectly, then the wheel doesn't roll properly. And all of these conversations are all part of the spokes of the wheel into us finding our ultimate health and our ultimate placement on this earth right now. And how are we going to move forward this plant? And I think that all of these conversations are incredibly important. And we're always gonna uphold the spoke in the wheel that is the full spectrum, that is the fully regenerative, because, you know, that's our expertise and that's what we uphold. But we want to say how much we respect and admire this conversation and the deep science that goes into it, because it is important to have all of the colors of the rainbow involved.
That's why we're humans, because we're all part of the rainbow.
Nice.
Humans.
I like it. Humans. I like it.
Olfactory views.
Can we talk about the trees real quick? We were about to, you mentioned you guys are having some issue up there with your old growth, and that maybe Dragonfly was involved as well.
Yep, I think they'd be
We're
great
not
to share.
directly involved. We're just very active nature beings. We live in a mountain region, and we are actively protecting the old growth in our area as well. But Fairy Creek on Vancouver Island and the Fairy Creek blockade is now the longest standing blockade in Canadian history. There's been at least 175 people arrested in the last, say, 3 weeks. It's an amazing standoff in the woods. And yeah, we've been supporting it in every single way that we can. There's been marches all over British Columbia, even in New York, different places in the world in solidarity to Fairy Creek.
And we're trying to really follow the lead of the Indigenous nations. This is their land. This is, so we're really talking to them directly at Fairy Creek. The elders and the chiefs that own the land outright are trying to be in communication with the federal government as well as the provincial government. They're not really getting anywhere. So we are trying to help disseminate out the information in a proper way by getting it from the Indigenous nations and following their lead. They are the ones who've been up there for the 175 days.
They've been up there since August. So this is a 10-month blockade all through the winter. And then the Canadian government released an injunction that allowed Teal Jones Group to go in and log the last old growth watershed valley on southern Vancouver Island. And as Marcus said before, there's only 2 0.7% old
and
growth.
I want to be really clear with everybody that these old growths are really massive yellow old growth cedars. They will not be using these old growths for really anything other than paper or you know, some kind of a fiber board or toilet paper, because it's not a hard wood. So what the ultimate reality is in logging old growth forest is that they want to be able to have the land so that they can replant it with the fir and the single species so that they can turn it into a higher commodity piece. If they replant it, then it's worth more money than the old growth standing.
So I'll just build on that by saying the yellow cedar is a really magnificent different subspecies of the cedar. Most of the cedar you see on the West Coast around you, Dustin, a lot of it's red cedar, Western red, maybe incense cedar when it's more hot, more exposed to the sun. There's Port Orford cedar in Oregon, very rare, very awesome from Port Orford, Oregon. The yellow cedar has a magnificent incense flavor and a magnificent flavor. The natives use this cedar to create coast up. In some cases, there's stories of them going all through Polynesia. You know, back in the day, the Haida Gwaii natives. Currently, we're on the Sinixt Nation. And the Sinixt Nation and the Kootenays has been called extinct, but they are now winning court battles to prove that they have a place here, that they have a language, that they have.
That was just lifted last month.
Yeah, recently they had just become legitimized again as a native indigenous nation. We're also near the Tanaha Nation, and they helped save Jumbo Pass. Keep Jumbo Wild was a very important environmentalist mission. So there's also the Trans-Canada Pipeline, and there's a tremendous amount of energy in the Native and Indigenous First Nations community to stop the pipeline. And people can look up the Tiny House Warriors and the Braided Warriors, and so many other people that are on the front lines in central and northern British Columbia to stop the pipeline.
And we're just really getting out very, very little information to you all. We really highly recommend that everybody go directly to the Fairy Creek Blockade, which is on Instagram.
Trans-Canada Pipeline.
Or Trans-Canada Pipeline.
And the Wet'suwet'en checkout. I may have said that wrong.
So that you can learn directly from these people, so you can get the proper education, so that we're not saying the improper things, which is just so incredibly important. Also, there's been terrible. I have to take a second here, actually, because just last week in Kamloops, there was 215 bodies found buried underneath the school.
The residential school in Kamloops.
For the residential school for the Indigenous nations.
The last residential school closed in 1998. Residential schools was an amazing, horrific schooling operation that tried to break the Native connection to Earth, to break the First Nations connection, to disassociate them completely from everything that they were about.
To take the Native out of the human was the goal of these residential schools. And now we have the capabilities, because of modern science and thanks to modern science, to radar underneath this residential school. 215 bodies were found, all the way down to 3 years old. So if that isn't a call to all of humanity to support all of us, then I do not know what is. If we are not waking up and recognizing that the powers that be, that governments, that politicize, that make money, that corporatize us, if we have not figured out yet that this is the demise of humanity that separates us, that causes us to find problems in all different people, no matter what color they are, no matter what race they are, no matter what religion, no matter what socioeconomic, no matter where they live, no matter how they feel or think. It's time now for us to react. It's time now for us to make a difference. All of this needs to be done.
It's also
over with.
Really important to look up missing and murdered Indigenous women in Northern British Columbia, just to finalize the respect for the oppression that's been happening against the First Nations people there. Please look up missing and murdered Indigenous women in Northern British Columbia. And if you feel called, put it out. Look at our story every single day. Put it out, you know, contact people every single day right now. I call as many people as I can in all facets of life to bring awareness to certain situations, including cannabis, including farming, including food security, medicine security, living security. The time is now. It's a pandemic. We've been locked down. We're fired up. We're ready to roll. And we got gardens to support us. We got spring water to support us. We have animals, everything we need. And now we need to rise up out of the rhizosphere, out of the soil, become empowered human beings, and now make change through our actions.
And we need to use our white privilege to support brown people on the planet right now. This is absolute imperative. This is what side you stand on. People are being hurt. People are being harmed, all in the name of big corporate nature and big corporations. And I wanted to say sorry, not sorry for bringing such a heavy load onto Hash Church, but we're all feeling it right now. Our DM is being blown up. People are losing it. Left, right, and center. We need to come back to center. We need to come back to source. We need to come back to love. We need to come back to happiness. Fear has no place in our future togetherness and our future health and well-being. It has no place.
And Dustin's been talking a lot about the extractions and stuff, but also he's an amazing regenerative cow farmer. And that's another thing that's on the chopping block in Oregon, to get rid of meat and animal husbandry altogether and create fake meat as a claim towards climate change. And we don't agree with that. What we agree with keeping nature systems alive, because we are nature, as we said in the chat, because we are nature, we think it's important to uphold nature cycles. So thank you, Dustin, for that work and everything else in the chain. Big love to the family. Big up. Let's make this happen. We're the change we're looking for. Without us and other people like us and the crew, shit's going away. We got to keep it alive.
We just appreciate everybody out there in the chat. Like, what an amazing crew of cannabis culture, again, over and over again. I heard some negativity, but always positive, and people have been hitting us up in the DM and checking in with us, and we're checking in with other people, and we're feeling the love, family. We just want to tell you that no matter what is going on in the world, and no matter what kind of walls people are feeling and, you know, come in on them right now, the magic is still there. It's bigger and it's brighter than ever, and there's more and more and people that are awakening to letting go of fear and taking on love.
Thank you guys for coming in and sharing that. That was indeed heavy, but it needs to be talked about and mentioned, and everything you guys said was super on point. It was, I hate to, you know, bring it even heavier, but that 215 is literally the tiniest tip of the iceberg that is the genocide of the Indigenous population, which just seems to be, like you said, it's the war on nature, right? Like they speak for the trees. Truly, if the Lorax was ever based on anything, it would be the Indigenous people. And so it kind of makes sense that whatever this is that just decides that it needs to destroy nature, the nature destroyer. It seems like the Indigenous people are, you know,
racism,
have been embattled in that.
Is it
partially
racism?
but it's, I mean, yeah,
like
it seems to be even
culturalism.
heavier. It depends on how deep the rabbit hole you go. Okay, if you're, and I get where you're coming from, Dr. Mark. You're probably racism for sure. But if you go like deeper down the rabbit hole, I think it's like good versus evil. Like it's just like that oldest energy. And the weird thing is, and I was talking about this with my wife the other day, that life itself is tension, and it's tension between birth and death. And that tension is held your whole life, and we all feel that tension. And that kind of seems to be the value that is life. And that you can't ever, because my wife was like, oh, there's just so much evil in the world. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's balanced. I think there can only be a certain amount of that and a certain amount of this. And then there's the tension between the two. And depending on where you navigate in that tension, shit can get heavier, shit can get a little lighter. Oh, you're muted, but I want to hear what you're saying, Josh. You're muted.
Also, if you go down the rabbit hole with racism, you find out we all came from Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really that simple.
Yeah. Well, it is really that simple, but for people who are blinded by ignorance and anger and hate, kind of like, going back to that sort of good versus evil again, if you're tapping into that energy, you're, what's just happened there, Josh? I'm watching the YouTube video and you're talking, but it's delayed. And so I'm thinking, oh, dude, what I want to hear from you, Josh. What were you saying? Oh, shit. I'm mildly.
Stoner party of one. Stoner party of one.
Stoner. Exactly. Hey, it's nice. It's nice to be baked. It's nice to be hanging out with all of you guys and chilling on a Sunday.
I think it's time to probably take a smoke and have a dab
and light some sage and clear the air, some incense in Asia, some sage and a cedar bough. Lavender is often in a smudge stick. So, Best Friend Farm's big enough over there. Some Tulsi, those kind of things are important. Some cherry pie could be really nice.
And I really support this brand. It's Echo Electuary down in Oregon. This one's one of their single source, but they do a lot of partner stuff. But he does the best job I've ever come across of getting the profile of a plant into an extract using a hydrocarbon. It's incredible.
Great guys. They know what they're doing. Definitely.
Yeah, and they support, it's 3 to the B. So 3% of their profits go directly back into bee conservatories. They have all their own on-site apiaries where their grows are. They practice regenerative agriculture. Great people.
3 to the B. I like that. Someone was oh, go ahead.
Well, we have a thing to share, and it has to do with Nick Risden, and anyone who doesn't know who Nick Risden is can look him up online on Instagram. Lime Rising Farms, Nick Risden, amazing person. He's been through Lyme's disease, is his one of his battles. It's led to many different things.
Well, it's Lyme's disease with multiple different bacterial infections from the tick bite. And he has just gone in for some accumulative
therapy.
Some not necessarily therapy, but they're looking at his brain. They're going in for testing to try to put him into, and I really want Nick to come on, and he will another time. So a lot of this I'm paraphrasing. He's going to have much better words. He's going to tell us exactly what's going on. So I'm just sort of giving a rough overview. He went in, they wanted to see what kind of things they could throw at him to instill a seizure, to see.
He can get up to 300 seizures a day, or,
and to look at those seizures on an EKG machine, and they had him, hooked up everywhere on a brainwave machine as well. And
here's what they found.
So this first picture he just shared with us this morning is them he goes into grand mal seizure, and they're trying to stop the seizures with every kind of drug anti-seizure that they had.
These are his brain waves.
Even they tried to give him some beers, which he knew wasn't FDA approved or anything. They threw everything at him, you know, all of the Adderalls, all the opiates, all the morphines. It wasn't slowing down the seizure. So his brain was still going in high mode. They finally said, okay, now
we don't have any more.
Which they had taken away all of his medicines because they wanted to throw all of their medicines at it. He was allowed to take the mycocanna caps, which is what we make, which is just a blend of mushrooms and CBD,
mushrooms
full spectrum.
from old growth forests. Again, they're mushrooms from old growth forests.
Yeah.
Mixed with hemp, grown regeneratively,
and
whole spectrum.
And a bunch of different adaptogenic herbs, compounded adaptogenic intelligent herbs. So he took 12 caps, a big dose, and then 45 minutes later, his
almost straight lined,
complete
normalized. And total,
completely
balanced, calmed, and they were amazed. And it was amazing to just see the science behind a medicine that can't be calculated. It's beyond calculation.
Which is what we believe about cannabis, because we were listening in before we came on to the incredibly intelligent conversation that you all were having before, is that when we're dealing with these adaptogenic secondary metabolites, you know, they change. Not only do they change in the making of them, but they change in the uptake of them and the response of them as well. So it's sort of hard to calculate this stuff, but here we are being given a really awesome representation
of the power of natural medicine and herbalism.
Well, and a person who's putting both of these things together really beautifully right now in a book that I'm listening to, and it made me kind of want to reach out to him and maybe invite him onto Hash Church, is Rupert Sheldrake's son, Merlin Sheldrake, who wrote a book called Entangled Life. And it is really worth checking out. I think it's like a $20 book or something, $18, or you can just get it on Audible and listen to it. And it is Merlin in his voice, sort of reading the book, which I find really wonderful. It just kind of is tying in a lot of what we're talking about right now. It gets into the sensory science. He's talking a lot about the mycorrhizae. He's been, you know, he went to school at Cambridge and basically studied a whole variety of different sort of synergies between plants, and learning about bacterias and viruses and how they can like transfer their DNA to one another horizontally, and bacteria can take just a really super unique and awesome conversation, but a lot about the mushroom, a lot about the mycorrhizae. And yeah, if you guys haven't heard of Merlin or you haven't checked out his book, check it out.
Dr. James White, who studies the rhizophagy cycle and endophytic and endophytic bacteria and fungi in plants. Plants have mycorrhizal fungi attached to their roots mostly. At the tip of the roots, you have the rhizophagy cycle, which is where the root transforms the nutrient and the trace minerals and brings it into the plant. Now, often in soils, there's pathogens all around the soil. Paul Stamets always talks about how can a one-celled or a single-walled organism live in soil with trillions of pathogens potentially killing it. It's because of its microbiome. It's because of its biome and its capability at the tip of the root and the rhizophagy cycle to pull through things that are only beneficial to the plant. It's a cycle that the body does with the microbiome. When our biome is healthy, we uptake what's healthy for us. Just like the plants in the plant root zone, it's gonna suck up what he's tested is all the endophytic fungi and bacteria that enters the plants through the soil are all beneficial. None of them are pathogenic. The plant's not suck. It could get attacked from the outside. It could get attacked because obviously plants have issues. But what its magic is, and bringing in chloroplasts and plant blood is going to be a beneficial reaction. And so we want to create medicine that enhances that process, because that process is what makes us humus beings and from the earth. It's what gives us our ultimate protection. Everything else is actually throwing it off. You know, the chemicals in the water, the different chemicals, the toxic, everything, it's throwing off our magic. Our magic is so powerful that there's medicine and foods and water and everything trying to take it down. But when you take it away and you become strong, it's unbelievable what happens.
It's all in the tension. Trust me. It's all in the tension. You can't have one without the other. You just can't. It's where we come from and it's where we go. And I'm sure it's why we get trapped in that sort of same sort of, we just have, and it's just our human nature. I think the whole part of being here is to divide and to become more like, no, I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of this. You know, when you come from everything and go to everything, kind of fractioning out and being like your own sort of individual self and finding your tribe is kind of what it's all about while you're here. But I promise you, whatever your tribe is, you're going back to everything. That's just the way it is.
And it's hard to fit all of that, you know, into a body. So just that alone is just so complex.
Thanks for cannabis.
I'm thankful for it every day because of that. It's hard to be in a body without cannabis.
Hey, Dragonfly guys, have you played around with Koji at all?
Absolutely. And working with Koji? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you tried catching Koji? Like catching an Aspergillus strain?
No, we haven't caught anything, or and defined it, or captured the DNA of it as Koji. We've ordered Koji and done all different kinds of grow out of it and different types of bean strains, and even adding greens and adding kombu, and going down the rabbit holes of seaweed and its interaction with it and the pH.
And seaweed
really
with
exciting,
and taking away the gases. And
why do you ask?
I just finished Koji Alchemy, and I've been talking a lot with the guy on Instagram, TM Gastronaut. Super great people. And so I started playing around with like miso marinating my steaks, which is cool, but the miso, it's not active. So I ordered the Aspergillus starter. My goal is to make it easier to incorporate specifically liver is what I'm after. And liver doesn't taste, beef liver is not the best tasting thing in my opinion. So getting it to a usable state without just using a massive amount of like bacon fat, basically. And I was talking to him about it and I said, how does it do with liver pate? And he said, it's excellent because it imparts that sweet, nutty flavor. And because it's blended, it becomes like an amino paste. So you're basically making like a miso, but to have a different name out of a liver paste. And for the rest of you guys, if you don't know about Koji, it's a mold type fungus, and it's like a microfilamentous fungus, and it sends its filaments down into whatever it's on and puts out exudates that convert the proteins, carbohydrates into sugars, which then the plant, in its symbiotic relationship, that's that function they were talking about earlier, where the mushroom makes this and the plant sucks it up and it gives up little parts to the mushroom, and they got this little relationship going on where they provide for each other. This one kind of is like a decomposer. So, and then so I can long cure steaks or chunks of meat like that, or you can blend it up. And so when you blend it up, it's much easier for the microfilamentous to get down because you've got it all mixed in the solution. So it can turn this beefy tasting liver paste, which sounds terrible and tastes kind of terrible, into something magical.
Does it tenderize the meat at all? Does it tenderize it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you do it on a steak, you get right? Absolutely. And then if you do like a reverse, this is what I did with the miso paste is marinated it for like 24 hours in a miso soy white wine mix, and then did a reverse sear. So brought the steak up to like 110 and then seared it on a really hot iron skillet, like a cast iron skillet. And the Maillard reaction with the miso paste was excellent. So, like the chard out, the black and blue, it was primo. And, like they mentioned earlier, these are from my like holistically managed cattle that we raise just up the street on some pasture that we lease. Yeah, and that system's working out great. They've never been fed anything. They drink water off the property. They just, the better we do, the better the grass grows. And now we have multiple years of soil test data to prove that we are sequestering a significant amount of carbon through these animals. And we also own a bunch of land up on the hill and practice broad scale permaculture in various systems. The only animal that's ever died at the cow pastures, other than maybe a snake got stepped on once by a cow, are the cows themselves. Everything out, the elk love it there, the deer love it there. We have beavers creating dams. I got snakes, I got birds, I got everything. I love all of it. Nothing there has ever died. I've never killed a single slug. On our permaculture farm, trying to grow greens and to be fair, we're in the forest, right? I'm in the middle of the forest trying to grow some annual crops, and it is just slug genocide up there. It's a constant battle with these things. Who's going to get more of it? So, when I look at cattle farming and one step better is this permaculture system that we're developing is with the intent that it provides such a bountiful production for the native wildlife that I could just not have to do cows anymore. And the elk, I'd much rather just get a couple elk and eat that throughout the year. I don't have to manage them the rest of the time. So if I can provide a system that makes an abundance of elk, that's a much better situation. So that's our long-term goal. But to convert, a patch of forest into a food forest in the middle of basically food desert, an industrial forest, like the whole thing's monocrop for timber production, like they're talking. That's all of Southwest Washington. Like 98% of the land down here is owned by timber companies. So I plot myself in the middle so that when hemp destroys the timber industry, I'll be primely set up to expand my permaculture throughout all this, what will become a liability. Like, what do you do with a bunch of trees when what's really interesting right now? I can buy hemp plywood for about half the price of like timber-based plywood. Wow. It's kind of fun.
Wow. Do you get that online or at a local building store?
Yeah, it's online. Let me dig it up. Someone sent it just the other day. I'll pull it up and see.
Plywood's like tripled and quadrupled in price in the last 6 months.
Out of control.
We're working with the hemp that we brought last time we were on here, and we weighed out 12 seeds and to a gram, and it's those kinds of hemps that grow so huge that we feel can make a difference in the timber industry. So we're working with Implanta and Daryl Hudson out of the University of Saskatchewan and helping develop those food and fiber strains that will make a difference, and it can replace the pellet farms and all of the toilet paper, all those things so much. Everyone knows it,
and it can offer like no problems to the entire cannabis industry because he's not ever seen them flower. Like they've never flowered out before. They just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. So they create beautiful cellulose, beautiful silicates, and
minimal flower,
great fiber, and no flower.
Look at this 3/4 inch thick board, $60. That's, how much that's like at least $75-$80 at the store right now, maybe even more. Even the 1/2 inch.
What glue are they using,
Isocyanate.
Pure Gorilla Glue.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So,
I think they're using 6-star bubble hash actually as their glue. It's like a 6-to-1 ratio.
Plywood's never been, a thing that was biodegradable. So I wouldn't necessarily expect that of hemp board, but it's still like, wow.
It can't possibly be as toxic and as much of a bummer as the other stuff.
Can these things be, so boarding and decking is one thing. And if it could be used as cladding, it's different. But can it actually be used as the undercarriage lumber underneath a deck? I mean, yeah, okay, decking, yes. But I don't think it could actually be used for like in place of like 2x10s and
it's not treated. It's not treated, Mark.
Right, so it's not treated, so it's not.
Okay, so what I just showed you is plywood, and yes, it's structural. You could use it as sheeting on a building, and that's what plywood, or you could use it as subfloor above those joists that you're talking about. If I was gonna, yes, you could 100% make structural pieces out of it. It would be in an I-beam configuration. So I'm building a house right now, and the traditional lumber, the long stretches are plywood going this way, plywood going this way in an I-beam shape. And it's just as strong and significantly lighter than the alternative current wood beam. If I had old growth, that's a whole different story, much tighter grain, yada, yada. But when we're talking about like the future of building and we're going to use hemp, it's going to be composite pieces like this. And you get a lot of structure just by changing it. And the real beauty where this stuff isn't quite at yet, but will be, and when they said they've got huge hemp plants, what we really want is 20-foot tall field grown like corn, basically, because those long fibers are where the strength's at. Because if I take a bunch of very long fibers, press and glue them together, I get exponentially more strength than a bunch of particle board pieces.
Yeah, they can start even putting shorter fiber into oriented strand boards. So oriented strand board is all the wood chips off the bottom of the sawmill, and what they do is they press those together into a laminate and glue it. And so the glue turns out to be the magic. I mean, there's lots of cheap sources of cellulose, and how to orient those fibers to get the real strength, the modular strength of the fibers themselves is definitely a trick. But I think this could certainly be used. The question I have, I mean, even for outdoor cladding though, Dustin, it would have to be, again, the biggest thing outdoors is ultraviolet light. So ultraviolet light will degrade lignin. So if you just put a piece of untreated wood out in the weather, after about a year, it turns gray. After about 2 or 3 years, it'll fall apart because all you have is cellulose. You've completely degraded all of the lignin. So the real question is how stable is the matrix that holds all that together? And that'll be where some innovation needs to happen.
Sure, and the same issue with plywood, and then if that's going to be an issue, if I've got wood that's going to be outside, then I treat it, right, with some usually pretty toxic chemical.
Nasty chemicals,
Right. Now, but in nature, I just do a better job of material selection. Like my cedar that's going to be exposed outside is fine because it can go 100 years underground.
Or wood that's naturally resistant to degradation, that's right.
And if I needed to go even further, I'll char the end of it before I stick it into the ground. And now it's going to last at least 2 lifetimes. Like, we're good.
There's still a product called Lifetime. Sorry, Dustin, if you wanted to finish up something. As far as the siding or cladding, as Mark said, you can use a product called Lifetime. It's made up here in the Kootenays, but they send it all over the world. The guys from the European family and a European coveted recipe or something, but it's powder, and you put it in 5 gallons of water, and really it smells like rust water. It's like I forget dioxide what the main component is in it, but they don't tell you what's in it. But what you do is you put it in a 5-gallon bucket or bigger, and you use a paint sprayer and spray it on natural wood, and it's like they say an herbal fungal mineral mix, and it kind of darkens the wood a little bit, turns it a little bit green, but it's a totally natural finish that you can spray on super easy, almost just like water out of a paint sprayer. And we just used it on our last timber frame structure, and I like it. And then we did the shoji ban,
charring,
the charring. So we did that for board and battens. So we did 1x8 and then did a batten that was charred. So it's kind of this interesting look of black striped and building. Dark. Yeah. But it's natural in that part.
Yeah. Cool. Also, there's great milk based paints out there, just to put it out there.
Do you guys have a sawmill?
We have 3 neighbors that have sawmills, so we don't have one at the moment. But I like the idea of getting an Alaskan chain mill, only for the rawness part of it. I don't see it as a great building material tool, but it's also we make mountain biking jumps and greenhouses and all kinds of sort of landscaping style building, and that works really good for us. But we have really amazing mills near us. So we do salvage wood out of clear cuts and on the sides of roads and definitely
out of our lake for sure.
Milled up. Yeah, the lake is a big source for us for full trees and things.
I imagine you have do you use wood burning heat in the winter on site? Yeah, so you have some managed timber production, and in that sense, you're probably coppicing, pollarding, whatever your source is, right?
We go wild on that, and we just gather it because we live literally on the side of the largest wilderness area in southern British Columbia. So raw materials are not a thing for us. It's not a
get it from your zone 4
not a
on the
managed
outside
situation. You can get it really easily.
We just get dead timbers that
But
are already down.
we do
and we make sure to
selectively.
leave it. And we're really
Lots
conscious
of
about
species.
how much wood we burn as
we
well.
have spruce, hemlock, fir, cedar, pine, and.
Do you guys have any rocket mass setups? Any rocket mass stove or heater or anything?
Not right now, but I have 2 greenhouses. My Wally Peony and the round one, which we call the mothership, is something I really want to build a rocket mass, more of an earth-fired stove, which will have water going through the beds. And then I also put a 300-gallon septic tank in the center of the greenhouse in the ground. So once the water starts flowing through, it can go into a holding tank in the center of the greenhouse. And there's also air tubes, 4 4-inch air tubes going 1,000 feet in the ground, 6 feet under, and then coming up in the center. So I like the idea of doing somewhat passive geothermal.
Yeah, big thermal battery, pretty much. The air tubes, are you catching all the hot air from the peak of it and then sucking it down into the ground?
The peak of it, I have just sandwiched 2 layers of plastic in between a full 2x4, full 2 dimensions. And I'm gonna put 4 air tubes going down like north, south, east, and west, and gather the hot air from the top, and then put it into the roof at the bottom, because the snow accumulates near the base. So once I get any heat from any of the sun, I'll be able to gather it at the hot end and then sort of force it through like forced air to make a little bit more of the bubble.
Sweet.
And we're on homestead time and we don't hire out work. So everything is magical and has its divine timing. And this lockdown has been very good for us working on our farm.
And we always laugh about how really and truly like being somebody that can't focus, or being 2 people that can't focus on one thing for very long, whatever you want to call it,
ADD, whatever.
It
works good for us.
It works great for farming, just in case. So if you want to.
What cannabinoid is that again?
Exactly.
I like terpinolene.
That's a terpene, not a cannabinoid.
I know, that's why I said that.
But I like it too.
And what's best friend? What have you been planting on your farm in the last week, or what? Can you tell us what you've done in the last? Oh, and Dustin, do you use ducks for your slugs? Because ducks and cows get along really good.
They love
and ducks
each other.
are really easy on the garden. They can go all over. They love.
And if you let the cows raise the baby ducks, then they'll protect them from any predators in wherever you're grazing. No.
We've had lots of ducks. We have no ducks now. I only ate maybe 1 of them, and the rest we feed the wildlife. It's very difficult where we are. Like I said, I'm like Mecca in the middle of the desert. There's nothing to eat anywhere until you show up at my spot, and then there's everything to eat. Doesn't matter who we are, big, small, eat plants, eat animals. Here you go. Got a dog, doesn't do shit. Like we lease a bunch of land down in like the flats of a slough about 10 minutes from here, and that's where we raise our cattle. So they're not yet integrated up, and I don't think I'm gonna integrate cattle up into the hill farm. It's just I just don't have enough. I might bring some of my small Dexter, but I think we'll probably do sheep, like the haired shedding sheep. And then we're in the process of fencing it, with elk fencing to try and get established with these trees. Because when you've got multiple thousand trees in the ground, it's a lot cheaper just to fence the whole thing than to try to fence each one. So that's where we're at with that right now. We will move back into fully integrated, and we've ran a lot of chickens with the cows just to control flies. Was great, but I've seen eagles eat my chickens. I've seen little like marmots eat my chickens. I've seen cats eat my chickens. It's endless. Same with the ducks. So
everybody loves those chickens.
They're sitting ducks, man. but yes, they did great for the slugs. It was an awesome solution. We'll get back to it when we can figure out how to keep them alive.
I just want to say that Tony Neg gave a beautiful, he calls it CBHD. So that's the new term. It's CBHD. And then what else? I wanted to say one other thing that, Aru GIF said, please say hello to me. It would make my day. Well, if that's not the easiest way to make someone's day, let's all say hi to Aru GIF in the chat room.
Hey, what up? Aru? Yeah, blessed love.
Smoke them if you got them.
Smoke them if you want it. Got them. Exactly. Sorry to interrupt there, guys, but I had to.
Farm.
I think.
Let's hear from Farmer.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Hey, Dustin. Have you considered using raised beds with rocks, like right dead center in your cutout for those greens, with like a rock fringe, even crushed rock around the rock raised bed for like just a really central rock raised bed, which would pick it up off the ground for those slugs, and then like any rock sand border, probably shardy kind of rock situation might help a lot. They lay off my beds that are right in the middle of the yard for sure and hot and dry, but even nearby other beds that aren't, they're centered more into the middle of the site.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this property that I bought is just steep downhill. So everything that's flat we put there, right, with terraces. We've got the whole thing integrated into, terrace, swale, pond system. And so, yes, some of the beds that are up close to like some of my access roads, which are, a lot of them are just rough rock roads. And they're all raised beds. We just use cedar that we thin for the boundaries of these beds, and they're all raised up. The problem is that I'm like I said, Mecca in the desert, and that desert is on the edge of the rainforest. It's like 110 inches of rain a year. So it is, the amount of slugs is next level. We've gotten pretty good at it. The little yeast traps are just destroy them. And if we can get back into ducks, but yes, yeah. The ones, another problem is that rocks are extremely expensive here because it's all clay. I've dug 40 foot down into the ground building ponds, and I've never once found a natural rock on the property anywhere. It's all clay, okay. And it's been this level of it's, so I got to bring them in, and that's expensive. But yes, wherever it's a bad place for slugs to be is usually a good place to grow your greens. That's a good tactic.
Sand might work, actually. Some more sand, like a sand fringe around something, which is cheaper than the rocks, some local sand. I don't know if you have much of that. We have a lot of sand in Maine, and I'm on granite bedrock mostly. I really, really enjoy my old pasture site, which is the one spot on my land. Big thanks to cows. It's like 200-year-old pasture land, and everything on that grows just amazing, all on its own. Really keeps regenerative, and you can tell the difference with it. So big thanks to cows and cow poop. Just wanted to throw that out there. I love the fungal colony. I don't know how you say, richness to it that I get, even for the quality on the terps and taste into my heavily local cow poop, pretty good percentage, probably 20-30%. My hemp field's probably half, 50% neighbor's cow poop, organic certed, and then just natural loam, and go from there. 3 seasons now, and it does great.
Does your biomass ever hit for bacterial? Like, have you ever tested your biomass for like microbial infection? Like, do you ever see bacterial hits?
Super healthy field in terms of just what I see anyway, visually. And I have been running some tests this year into soil, obviously tests on the medicine and the plant matter itself. I haven't seen any flags pop up or dug deep into having further testing into the biomass, though. The leftovers or other stuff goes right to the compost, with that pretty quickly. And yeah, super healthy, Mark, on the cow poop and natural.
The reason why I ask is, in particular, all the Amish around here use a lot of manure in their hemp farming, yet their COAs, they're getting hit for just total, it's not E. coli, it's just I don't know. I think it's just total bacteria or something like this.
Total
Aerobic.
Is it like
Total aerobic. Exactly what Mike said. Totally aerobic. And what they come back to me is they say, well, what does this mean? And so my interpretation of that, and Mike, tell me if I'm correct on this, is that they're doing
total aerobic includes lactobacillus.
Yeah, but I don't think they're streaking plates. So I believe what they're doing is they do some sort of genetic analysis, and that determines that there was DNA of this bacteria on this biomass at one time, but now the biomass is ground and dried and it's totally fine and totally okay to process. But these guys are all like, well, wait a second, it's got all this microbial, and the numbers are like in the hundreds of thousands of colony forming units. So they don't exactly know how to interpret that data. So
I would say, I don't know, you know more, but my field is pretty dry, and when you kind of mentioned maybe like the dry out for the bacteria die off perhaps, and if you're going to keep it, well, I know that like wet and moist, you're going to harbor environment, at least set it up for your fungal and your bacteria to thrive. So my field's pretty dusty dry. Part of why I did that is it's on top of bedrock, so it's whatever loam I could scrape up after clear cut and mix kind of 50-50 with the cow poop. But my cow poop was aged. When I went in on that stuff, it was at least 1 year, even 2. Some of it was 2+ years old, coming into 3 now for, at least. So also broke down, aged, sawdust in on it, a lot of straw, local straw and sawdust in.
It's not cow poop anymore.
Well, you got to realize that the same bacteria that's in compost is also going to be ubiquitous within your fields. It's going to be being blown around on the air currents and moved around by the wind and the rain. So ultimately, the same lactobacillus that's coming out of the helping the milk turn into cheese is also going to be ubiquitously found on your plant material in the field, as well as during the drying process. During the drying process should inhibit the mold, as long as it's done in ideally a cool and dry environment. But generally speaking, what's going to happen is those microbes are going to form spores. Those spores are then capable of being grown when they're in a suitable environment. So oftentimes people aren't drying the plants fast enough, or you're getting that microbial degradation that we were talking about earlier with hydroxylation happening either in the field. The wine industry, they call that noble rot, right? They actually make sweet wines because it increases the sugar content in beer.
Exactly.
There's some hydroxylation that I'm sure is going on when we have early rains in the cannabis industry that may be forming interesting cannabinoids that we're only now being able to detect the high accuracy HPLC.
Yeah, hey Mike, it's just hydroxylation. There's no is in there. So hydroxylation.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, well, and I think that as long as it's in that biomass form, you're probably going to have that mold, then that chance of microbial growth and degradation. So the sooner that people can either turn it into hash or turn it into extracts, the less degradation of the cannabinoids and terpenes that you're going to have. So, but yeah, it's, ultimately it's something that the Washington state had the zero tolerance on all aerobic bacteria the first 2 years, which was tough for a lot of the organic farmers because they wouldn't pass, and they would then have to grow cannabis organically and then process it through some sort of extraction that filters out any of that microbial content.
Well, yeah, there's no microbial content. They're just measuring DNA of microbes that lived on the plant material during the harvest. And that, isn't, if you're doing some kind of
it depends
solvent
on the
extraction, there's no
most of the labs though in state labs will just do the plating. I'd say the minority of the labs are actually doing the DNA sequencing. DNA sequencing is probably more suitable because then you can actually identify, rather than identify whether it's a good or bad. You want to be able to identify if it's a harmful bacteria or a bacteria that produces those mycotoxins. You know,
exactly.
It's total aerobic. You know, it's going to negatively affect a lot of the terroir because you're not, you know, those microbes that create those terpene precursors in the root systems are going to be essentially have to be scrubbed out of the industry. Otherwise, they'll, you know, naturally show up in these total aerobic plates. Now, you know, Washington in the first 2 years of legalization took a conservative approach, put a zero tolerance. I believe Oregon didn't require microbial testing the first year or two, and then did, but they set a kind of a lower bar and a really tight bar on pesticides. So what ended up happening with Washington is they didn't require a lot of testing, and then slowly started requiring more and more testing. So
it's required everywhere. I mean, 18, I know it's required in California, right? It's required everywhere now.
Colorado is like just came on board or is about to, maybe hasn't even on pesticide
I
testing.
can't think of a regulated market that doesn't require it.
Colorado, or it just happened.
Yeah, and Washington didn't require it. It's just they say that they will test random samples, and if you fail, you'll get a recall or something like that.
Yeah, well, California is interesting because California has a remediation pathway. So if stuff fails, it can be remediated and still be in the metric system, the tag system, or whatever. So that's kind of a little weird, but anyway.
Well, here's the thing with that, and I hate to say that it's a good way to save the farmer's crop, right? Because of what I've seen happen in some parts of the country that are close to orchards or close to vineyards, you're getting crop drift and you're failing for crop pesticides that you didn't yourself spray for it. Other cases, it may be accumulated from the soil.
Future 4,200, readership, right? All those folks who were able to save all that distillate by doing a fluorosil chromatography or whatever it was that they did to get rid of the Eagle 20, right?
A sand scrub.
Well, I'm sorry, what is it?
Yeah, a scrub it with sand, right? Silica, it's just a sand.
Sub it with a sand scrub. Hey, you could sell that. That's like a catchy tagline, right? For a business, right?
Will you write my jingle
Carbon
too?
Chemistries, right, Dustin? Go to Carbon, right? They want to sell stuff to the industry, so
I'm sure there's going to be patents that get developed out of it, but ultimately, I do think that part of what's called media bed filtration is used.
Right.
I used it prior to getting into the cannabis industry when I was working in the biofuel industry, and
y'all know in our industry Murphy Murray, right? You know Murphy, who does her CRC classes in Mass, and I first met her on the Adam Dunn show. I always thought there was something, kind of interesting going on there. But it's very interesting to use that as a sort of like a widespread technique, no matter whether your stuff's contaminated or not, to just get a more pure fraction. But I always thought that for the most part, you want to get as full spectrum of an extract as you possibly can. So fractionating it into these very nice looking product has its place, but not with all products.
If I've been in her personal lab, and she has taken that to full circle back around to the highest level. So not only does she have like a 6-foot chroma column that she uses, a separation column that again she fills with dirt, right? Sand and dirt, basically, like you said, and then she also has a very nice hydrocarbon falling film, which allows her to selectively change the temperature off which fraction she takes. She then takes all of the choice fractions and blends them back together, right? And it allows her to separate out parts that you wouldn't want to probably smoke. Exactly, definitely not at scale. So it's very interesting what she's done. She's been isolating lately esters. She's got a jar full of it, and it's crystallizing on its own, and it smells like bananas. It's the craziest thing. That was the first thing she showed me when I was in there. She also has lots of blue crystals growing, blue terpene crystals growing.
I say amyl acetate. Isn't that the banana ester?
I'm not sure what it is.
I'm not looking online. I'm just remembering off the top of my head. Isoamyl acetate. Somebody check me on that.
Getting these things tested is a bit tricky and or very expensive, right? Like your normal cannabis lab's not going to be able to tell you what your ester is. They might be able to get you around the right path, but
back to Marcus's terminology that all these things are kind of like sometimes you have to remediate shit because you got pesticides in it and you can't make a sellable product until you remediate. Other times you're looking to not remediate, but you're looking to what you were saying, Dustin, fractionate. And whether you fractionate by, again, that sounds badass to have a thawing film evaporator where you could separate different fractions. That's so cool. I mean, she's in a very good position. I know the guys that she works with to enable her to be able to do that kind of work and R&D. It's
and
really
look, when we make water hash, we're fractionating in a sense as well. We're excluding things by particulate size, and we want some things to go through the bag and some things to stay on the other side of the bag, right? It's just, we're just taking that further down the line. So it's like, where do you draw the line? And then when we smoke based on the temperature, that's how much of whatever's in there is getting into our lungs, right? We're kind of fractionating it right there too, based on the vapor pressure or the vaporization point of it. So a lot of our interaction, other than just like straight up eating the flower, is some form of us selectively getting down the line past the flower to the active ingredients that we want.
A little bit of isomerization, but a lot of decarboxylation, and that's it. No ring closing acid chemistry bullshit.
I recommend eating a piece of the bud that you're smoking, because it does release a whole, like, the magic terpene in your mouth.
Yes.
And then, by smoking it, sensation is.
I would definitely be down to like soak a bunch of buds in butter and then bake them for a little while and then eat that. That sounds delicious.
Also, just putting a fresh bud into hot water, like a tea. I mean, everyone's heard about it. Yeah. But like, do it. It's insane. Like the terpenes in the water are just like, wow.
Everyone's heard of it here in Canada, especially because that was one of Kirk Toussaud's main arguments when he explained to the judge, as it sits right now, this cannabis is legal. And then if like your grandmother like took it and put it in a tea bag and put it into hot water, now she could face 14 years in prison. And the judge was kind of like, that was it for him. He was just like, yeah, we have to allow extracts. Like there's not going to be any way around it. And just like that, just in BC at first, across Canada, we went from having, no ability to do extracts to kind of overnight, suddenly, extracts were allowed. And then they also redefined the word marijuana, which was like marijuana meant just the plant, the flowers or whatnot. Then the judge was like, no, marijuana, this is how we got extracts to be allowed. He said, marijuana is every component of the plant. So if you have a license and you can have like a pound, then you're allowed to have a pound of any part of the plant. And so that was the game changer here in Canada. So yeah, shout out to
we had always heard about it, being put in your tea, mom's tea, et cetera, et cetera. And so we always used to kind of laugh at the idea, because there was never the thought of, I'm going to take a fresh bud and put it in this tea and, let its terpenes dissolve. We didn't even know what terpenes were in the sense of what we were actually ingesting. And then to think of then just putting a flower in boiling water just seemed antithesis of anything that we were trying to do to quote unquote get us high. But of course, leave it to, older generations to know there was something there, and that science has caught up to its understanding about the terpenes and all that actually does come out in the water. So you won't necessarily get that.
The terpenes are certainly soluble, but the cannabinoids in their acid forms are not particularly water soluble at all, even in hot water.
Correct.
Yet Jamaican grandmothers, have been doing this for a very long time. Like even while they're kind of like harshing on the grandkids for smoking spliffs in the back room when their backs are sore, or previously to that to have like cramps from their periods or whatnot. Like there were mothers using this stuff. It was like kind of the ancient medicine.
No, I've heard those same stories.
Yeah.
But what I can't help but wonder is if they could have somehow tested the bud before the grandma made her tea and after she made her tea and dried it and seen what was the difference? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, if I'm getting the terps out of the trikes because the water's so hot, in theory, I'm probably dissolving a lot of the trikes. The cannabinoids may not be soluble in the water, but if I drink all of that water, I'm going to get all those cannabinoids inside of me. Like, what do they float on the top? So they're just floating around there instead of mixed into the thing. If I drink it all and get that top layer down my gut, I'm getting those cannabinoids inside of me for sure.
I'm not so sure about that. Have you actually tested that?
Cup.
It could definitely stick to the rim of the cup, right? But in theory, if it was on the top, if I boiled it and used a straw and sucked it up, or just put my lips down on the top of the cup, right, and sucked it out of the top,
well, wait
I'm
a second.
Get them on my lips.
What's the compelling nature? I mean, so if you're just putting cannabis into a tea bag and you drop the tea bag into hot water, like Sam said, the cannabinoids aren't going to be soluble. Very slightly.
It depends
soluble.
on how long you leave it in the hot water for. It depends on how tenacious you are, I guess.
Is this boiling water?
Yeah, exactly. If you're above or below the melting point of the cannabinoids, they should melt. The terpenes are going to help co-solvate the trichromes, but it's going to form a biofilm on the surface.
Right. Who's going to drink boiling hot water?
Well, you let it cool down. The cannabinoids are still going to be there, right? The cannabinoids aren't going back to the flower when it cools down.
They're just going to leave a sticky film all over the place, right?
The point is, they're not going to be on the bud anymore, is my argument.
Yeah.
So utilizing an animal milk like is used in Bang, that's a homogenized.
Now that's different. It's got a
do it in milk. Now you're winning.
Yeah.
Guys, I've been prescribing tea to my patients for a really long time. Just putting flowers in tea, and you can ask all them. It definitely works.
And also,
it definitely
we're not saying does it work. I've heard it from many people that it works. What I'm saying is, what percentage of the active ingredient is being delivered to the patient, and what percent is left in the plant? That was my only question.
Good question.
We have enough scientists here that can actually just boil some cannabis and figure out what's left. I mean, come on, enough of y'all know how to work. You guys, chromatographs.
You need an emulsify. You need something to emulsify the fats into the water layer. We've talked about this many times. And, this is not anything that's easily done with just plant material and water. You have to.
You put plant
bubble
fat
ash.
They put
ice.
like goat butter. Oh, they put the goat butter in there. Trust me, there's a fat in there too.
In prison, they use Reese's peanut butter cups because they have soy lecithin in the peanut butter cup. So they would actually chew up their last bud and then chew it with a peanut butter cup so it would break down because nobody wants to smoke their last bud.
Damn, that's why I was getting paid so much for those peanut butter cups in the Hoosgow there.
But if I can make hash from ice water, then I should be able to make hash from hot water where I just agitated the shit out of it and use it to, if I pressure wash with hot water, a bud, a plant.
And I'm curious, how much research have you done on this? For example, I actually took water hash and put it in a tall, large glass container and poured boiling hot water in it to see what would happen. So, I mean, I've been playing around doing this RDT on cannabis a long time. And I'm still curious what I did ask about.
You had lots of starting material to experiment with.
That's for sure. And it was legal to do the work.
And diverse.
Once that beaker cooled down, you could drink it, and that hash is getting inside of you, whether it's soluble in the water or not, right? Unless it's still in the beaker somewhere.
It's not very soluble in the water, but in this particular case, what did happen was the hot water would cause the massive bubble hash to sink down to the bottom of the container, where it would get hotter and it would bubble back up like a lava lamp. It would spread on the top, cool off, and sink back down again. So what it did is gave me a few hours of mindless fun.
You know, it's kind of more passive medicine, a little bit more homeopathic. You know, I mean, a person that's making ganja tea is probably a farmer. You know, I wouldn't say that someone's going to go to the store in Canada and buy legal Canadian cannabis weed and go home and make ganja tea and heal their ails. I think the idea is that you are living and breathing the medicine. You're smoking it, you're doing ganja tea, you have oils. Everyone knows that oils and those kinds of things dissolve the trichomes. So if you really want to dissolve the trichomes, you might have like the butter and the things like that. But if you make tea, you know, you might, if you really want the medicine, you probably eat the bud afterwards. You don't use a tea bag. You just drink it hot and then you eat the bud afterwards. Like when you make garden tea, and like we have products that are, you know, we don't recommend people using a bag to brew their tea. The water should go in you, along with all the worm castings, and all the herbs should be in your body afterwards.
Yeah, water extraction from a plant is not the same as water extraction from an extract, because the plant has much more lipids present. And if I'm heating those lipids off the plant surface up, and then there's cannabinoids floating around, I've got a little bit of a lipid emulsion going on. You know, that's what winterization is when we're processing. It's all these extra lipids that we extracted that we're trying to get rid of. Those lipids are very cannabis soluble. A lot of people lose a lot of their cannabinoids to that fat cake that they've got because they didn't wash them back out. So you can load those lipids up. So, and that's all coming from the plant. So hot water plant extraction has some tiny percentage of cannabinoids that are becoming soluble just from what's going on with the plant.
No, I agree with this, because when I've interviewed people in traditional cannabis producing countries where men and especially women would make tea, as you're talking about, and they would say, you know, that it gave them this benefit or that benefit or this benefit. And I was just wondering if anybody actually knew how much of the THC and other cannabinoids or terpenes, I imagine most of the terpenes are gone, still remain in the plant material. That's all.
Yeah. So like conventional tea, or what, Camille sinensis or whatever it is, those are all water soluble polyphenols that are actually, the polyphenol portion is the aglycone of a much larger molecule that looks kind of like the anthocyanins. So these are very large water soluble molecules that come out in the tea. I mean, and so that's, you know, cannabinoids aren't aglycones. They're not, they're fat soluble, stuck in the trichome. You're not going to easily solubilize it in hot water. I always found it interesting though, and Sam, I don't know if you've ever looked at this before. It appears as though there's a good process that uses hot water to do extraction, and almost kind of like, I won't say it's like ice water hashing, but it's hashing in a way using hot water or super pressurized steam or Dustin. I don't know if you know about this at all, but
no,
you can make
I'm not familiar with it. And if you find a reference
I think Dustin's about to tell us about it, but
okay.
They make a pretty high percentage CBDA product from hemp now, and I've seen this coming out of Oregon. Dustin, do you know anything about that?
Well, science is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, this is hash church. Holy shit. Let's talk about hash.
put that lava lamp image back in your mind, and then imagine that I can wash, you know, through that lava lamp, I can send a different solvent down that will allow me to grab the hash and leave the water behind. Like typically in like your cooking oil industry, that's going to be hexane. But guys are getting crazy with it. They're like percolating propane through it. So that, you know, the beauty there is that the propane can then be separated from your hash at a very low temperature. Right. So if I'm trying to save all my acids and whatever non-water soluble terpenes that might be left, they're getting crazy with it. So it's just a liquid extraction from this glob that's in your water. And the hot water, the pressure water, that's just to break the trikes off and get it
right.
In the mix.
Right. Well, I mean, again, some hybrid of that process to me sounds pretty scalable, but sounds like something that you'd want to have really good regulation around the equipment and the process and the manufacturer. And just like when I look at the size of the tanks at Marcus's facility, I can imagine that process being carried out at that tremendous scale there.
Look, there's
because that makes a very clean product. I was amazed how clean the product is. I didn't know the level of detail about the process that you just described. So thank you.
And there is a few more that are floating around. One of them is like an acidic wash where it's just warm acid and you're just, it's very low. It's not very abrasive, right? And then we can do an acid base crash out from there. Because we're targeting those acidic cannabinoids. That one's got a lot more steps involved. And then the other one is an enzymatic type extraction where it's warm with enzymes, and the enzymes are breaking down the trichrome surfaces. And then that's allowing the cannabinoids and terps and everything in there to come out. And like we said, they pop to the top and then become a lava lamp. And then, if you want to stay truly solventless, there's ways to get the water off without any solvents, but you're leaving a purity step behind when you do that. That may be beneficial or not.
Now, we got to ask, and the rest of the church wants to know from Sam, did you patent the hash lava lamp? I mean, come on. That's like a fucking statement. If you have enough hash to fill a lava lamp, you got lots of hash, right?
Well, but I couldn't patent it. But to be honest, I was thinking, well, how am I ever going to sell these when cannabis wasn't even legal when I? But yeah, I'm sorry I didn't do it now. It would have made my retirement much more plush.
Dude, I guarantee you this, that most people's hash, it wouldn't work with. Yours worked because of the utter and complete ridiculous quality and purity that you can get it to. But like, I just doubt that every resin would do the same thing.
Dude, yeah, this would have the no green line at the top.
We could use this episode alone just to blow it up. Someone needs to invent the hash lava lamp, man. Come on, Sam.
Well, there you go. Come on, Sam.
If you have really good, clean water hash, you can easily do it also.
Well, I think it has to be really clean and really good, because I've cleaned some not so good stuff.
Then it will work. I mean, come on, there must be some people with an extra ounce of water hash pollen, dried weight I'm talking about.
Come on, Dustin, some of your tribe has got to be up there.
A couple gallons of boiling water on it.
Oh my God. A couple of good laughs today on Hash Church. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to call a hard stop at 12 p.m. So we have like 3 minutes to wrap it up. We can continue next weekend for sure. But anyone that wants to say more now, this is your chance. And I'll thank you now, Dustin, for coming out. We'll have you back again as well if you want to come share some more. And thank everyone for being on the panel. So let's finish it off here with our last couple of minutes. Say whatever you need to say, guys.
Yeah, great having you here, Dustin. Again, some of your tribe, I joined your future 4200 there. It's a fascinating site. Good shit. But there's got to be some people out there that in your network there that at least should have been piqued by this discussion. And hopefully we'll start to see some prototypes in the coming weeks. Come on, people, you can do this. All the techniques are on Hash Church, right? We've talked about it enough.
Well,
hey, I'm a member of Future 4200. I just noticed that.
Appreciate you, man.
There's a lot of good information out there if you wade through the threads, man, and there's just discussions where you can get lost for hours. I've done that. So thank you, Dustin. Thanks for coming out today, buddy.
There's one about us talking on Hash Church right now that I just found from Farmex, Oregon. That was like the fourth post I found.
It's meta as fuck.
There's like a picture of Dustin. That's pretty fun. Awesome.
I felt like this has been before. This has happened many times.
Well, there's nothing wrong. I would think that there's lots of familiar people in both circles. So, right, Dustin? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I think I knew at least 3 of you guys before this. I hung out with the Dragonfly guy in Hawaii last year. Mike, I've met. I think up maybe at Lyft, maybe hanging out with Tim. We've met somewhere before.
You knew Horatio pretty well, didn't you? He was on there.
Yeah, really half in here. Yeah, Horatio, I did know Horatio pretty well.
Because he mentioned, he talked to you. He talked about you quite a bit.
Yeah.
I got on there. I've been on your forum and I've read a lot of stuff. But yeah, it was great to see everybody here today. And always thank you for having me. And I hope everybody has a fantastic Sunday. And just keep that positivity going, growing. And I want to challenge you guys all to a solo cup grow. So I want everybody to grow a plant in a solo cup all around the world. So if you have a chance, grab a solo cup and just grow in a solo cup. Keep it in your window, whatever. Just grow solo cup and maybe even pass that on to somebody else and keep them growing their journey. So as always, guys, peace and love. And thanks for having me, Mark, and everybody else on the panel. Awesome. Keep growing.
I feel bad I took my plant out of the solo cup, but it's doing so much better in a bigger pot. Thanks for the animal cookies, Johnny B.
Well, if you want to maintain it as a bonsai, just remember, you just take it out, remove the bottom third, and then put in new soil, and then you can put it back so it keeps the roots growing. Otherwise, you'll get root lock. Bonsai tricks.
I think I must be a new member or something because my shit needs approval on Future 4200. If only I knew the guy that owned the website or something, I could maybe get a little boost on my. No, I'm just little juice. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming and hanging out, and I hope you guys all have a really nice Sunday today. Let's try and do it again next week. I'll send out the emails if you guys want to come back. We'll talk some more, and otherwise. May that full melt bless your bowl sooner than later's. Peace out, everybody.
Thank you, Marcus.
And start
Thanks, everyone.
medicinal mushrooms into your diet.
Absolutely. The recording has stopped.